or 2012. I'm close.
Okay, go. Yes.
Yes, and I'm 10 years younger. So this is a work session for the City Council. As everyone can tell, we are meeting today at the Royal Johnson Community Room of the Billings Public Library instead of the regular City Council chambers to allow for more separation distance between members of City Council, staff, and members of the public, since Omicron continues to rear its ugly head here in Montana. Our procedures tonight will actually be pretty much the same as they would be if we were in the regular council chambers. However, our chairs are not as comfortable. And they've also been arranged in this horseshoe-shaped space around the pizza box central microphone up there. So for any of our new council members, that is the microphone that picks up each of our council members. And with this configuration, the expectation is that all the council members will be able to be heard better than when we were all over there and somewhere in a second row. Be warned, though, that the microphone is very sensitive, and so everything you say can and will be used against you in the court of public opinion, potentially. So watch the hot mic. Assistant City Administrator Kevin Iflin will be monitoring people who are attending the meeting by Zoom, and if he raises his little flag, that tells you that, or tells me that there's somebody who wants to speak and has their hand up. I may not see that, so feel free, if you see that, to call my attention to it. Because this is a work session instead of a regular business meeting, our procedures tend to be a bit more informal, and our discussion won't result in any final decisions tonight. With the possible exception that we may give instructions to staff to work on an issue and come back to us at a later date with more information or a specific recommendation. You know that, but that's for any members of the public who might be watching this evening or with us today. There will be an opportunity to comment on each of the 6 items on our agenda, typically at the end of the council discussion on each one of those items. Instructions for how to watch our meetings and how to offer public comment can be found on the first page of the agenda of every City Council meeting. And that agenda can be found, as I don't know if we've got any, doesn't look like we have any here, but you can always get one online by going to the city's website at www.billingsmt.gov and searching for agendas and minutes. Basically, there are 5 options for watching all City Council meetings. 1, of course, you can come here and attend in person. 2, if you have cable, watch on Channel 7, which is Community 7 TV. 3, stream the meeting on the city's website, www.billingsmt.gov. Stream on the Community 7 website, www.com7tv.com. Or lastly, join us on Zoom. To do that, look at the instructions at the beginning of the agenda to get the webinar ID number and the passcode so you can join on Zoom. If you want to offer public comment at any meeting, you also have 5 options. First, come to the meeting. Second, send us a letter at the address shown on the agenda. 3, send us an email at the email address shown on the agenda. 4, connect using Zoom, using the raise hand feature when you get to the time for public comment on your item. Or lastly, 5, you can always call in using a landline phone if you don't have those other computer options. To do that, call the Zoom number that is listed in the instructions on the written agenda. So with that, we'll move ahead. I do want to remind everybody that we have exits here in this building out to the courtyard, on both sides of the grass wall, through the storage closet area there. That actually is an exit, and then these 2 exits out to the hallway where you probably came in. Just to call everyone's attention to our agenda tonight, there are 6 items on the agenda. They should be relatively straightforward. The last 3 are kind of scheduling items and could be very short. So Las Vegas, I'm told, is betting 50-50 that we have the chance to be done before taking a break tonight. Sometime around 7:30, but that's only 50-50, up to you. Lastly, I'll just remind everybody that our facilities group is looking for surveys results from council members on the use of the Stillwater building and the build out. So if you have not filled out that survey and you're interested in doing so, you're encouraged to, but they need that soon. So try to get that done and back to them just as soon as possible. With that, before we move to item number 1, I'm going to hand it to our City Administrator, Chris Kukulski. Chris.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My only request is that you consider voting to move the audit up into the first slot. Got some folks here from out of town that'll let them possibly get back home this evening earlier, and I let Casey and Debbie know that we may swap the order. So if you're inclined, it does require a majority vote to change the order to move number 3 into the first slot. If not, we'll just work our way through the normal order.
Thank you, Chris. So we'll ask the council, is there a motion to that effect or any other questions? Council Member Boyette?
Mayor, I move that we change the order of tonight's viewing and move number 3 to number 1 and 1 to number 3.
Okay, is there a second for that motion? Council Member Tidswell. Discussion about the motion. Is there any discussion about the motion? Councilmember Shaw?
Just to be clear, we're switching 1 and 3. We're not moving 3 and then bumping everything else down.
Is that okay, Chris?
Either way you want to do it works.
Just wanted to be, okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
that's correct.
Okay. If no further discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. We'll begin with our audit. And we'll just hand it over to Andy for an introduction. Finance Director Andy Zeller.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. We'll get this running here really quick. So tonight our auditor is here from JCCS to present the findings of our 2021 annual financial report, which ended on June 30th. It was a clean audit with no findings, so we're pleased for that. I do want to thank our 3 accountants here, Jim, Sarah, and Donna. They do all the work all year long, and then when the financial report needs to be put together, they're in charge of compiling and putting it all together. So they do an excellent job, and I think, I don't know how many years running we've had. Is there no?
You're working up the time.
I know.
I'm
just going to indicate, can we turn the lights off that are on the screen we have there?
Okay.
Or,
Got it. All right. Cool. Yeah. So we've had multiple years of clean audits, and it's their hard work that we're able to do that. So let's see if we get that going. All right. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Tyler Bryant to go over the audit, and then I do have copies of the financial report here. Some of you who were at orientation on Friday got that. It is online, and I'll hand them out to you after the presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate that. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. So Andy did say I'm the auditor, but I'm really just the talking head. You know, I've got a whole team behind me as well who helps us do this entire audit for the city. So more than just one person, but accountants don't like to do presentations, so where I get to come in. So my name is Tyler Bryant. I'm a shareholder with JCCS based out of our Helena office, and like Andy said, I just want to go over the audit for the last fiscal year. So before we get too deep into that, I do want to go over a couple things that kind of outline what an audit is and what it isn't, and don't want to have too many, we don't get into too much of the detail during this presentation because as you've seen with the books, or if you've looked through the financial report itself, it's 250 plus pages, and of course we only have 2 hours. We're going to take all 2 hours to get there, right? So I don't want to go over every single detail, right? So first I'll start with How we
And Tyler, I apologize for interrupting you, but what I should have mentioned to you and any members in the audience is, although you have a microphone, which goes to the television audience, we do not have amplification within the room. So it's it looks good, but it doesn't really help. So please keep your voice up, and everybody the same way. If you're at the podium,
Sure.
project across the room. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. So we begin our audit with, trying to find where to put my hands here, with our initial planning, and that happens with Andy and the rest of the staff, and that's the August and September timeframes. And we're discussing risk, we're discussing areas that maybe we should focus a little bit more on because of new changing rules or whatever the situation may be, or any particular requests that the city wants us to look at. We also have discussions on any new accounting pronouncements or anything like that that needs to be implemented for the year. Then we begin our field work, which is when we come on site, and that's in October and November. There's about 5 of us that come over, and we're on site for a couple weeks. Last year was remote. This year we were able to come back in and perform the work on site. And that's when we're working with city staff around the city, in addition to just the finance staff. And that's where we're doing testing of transactions and account balances and looking at invoices and reconciliations, all that fun stuff that accountants do, right? So spend a couple weeks during that time frame doing that sort of work. And once we feel comfortable with all the audit evidence that we've gathered and all of our testing, that's when we go into reviewing the annual financial statements, which are prepared by finance staff. And then we take our time to look through those, make sure that they agree with what we've done as far as our testing goes, and that leads into the issuance of the financials. And at this point now, the presentation to go over those results. So like Andy said, it's another good year, another clean audit, in that there's nothing reportable no findings to report to you at this level. One of the things that comes into account with that is what's called materiality. You'll see in our opinion, we talk about materiality a little bit, but basically what that means is the city's got a lot of assets, a lot of big numbers, right? And we as auditors can't look at every single dollar, every single transaction, or our fees would be $10 million, right? That's not how an audit's designed. It's not what it does. So we use what's called materiality, and we look at levels that we believe would impact the users of a financial statement. So if it's $10 is coded in a different expense account than where it should be, $10 is not going to impact anybody. If it's $10 million, that's a bigger number, right? So we talk about materiality as far as where we focus the audit. The other item I want to talk about is we are the independent auditors, meaning we don't have any, we don't impact management decisions. We don't give advice, if you will, as far as where to allocate funds or how to handle the budget. We're there to verify what was done and that it was done properly from a third party's perspective. Okay, so now we'll jump into the PowerPoint here a little bit. This is what's on the cover of the financials. It's a rendering of the terminal expansion. This is a list of some of the presentation items we're going to go over. It looks like a long list. It won't take quite that long to get through it. One thing that's not on this list, but I highly suggest, if you do nothing else when you look at the financials that you read, it's called the MD&A, Management's Discussion and Analysis. It's pages 3 through 12, 9 pages of narrative and tables that explains what happened to the city for the year and compares it to the last year. It's easier to understand than the other 200 pages. It's written in a way that should be readable. And I highly suggest that you read through that each and every year as a way to comprehend what the other 200 pages are kind of explaining in more detail. Okay, so this is just a copy of the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. This is presented from one of the oversight entities, the GFOA, basically stating that last year's, the 2020 fiscal year report meets all the requirements to have the Excellence in Financial Reporting. Will be submitted for again for the current year. This is our independent auditor's report. We've talked a little bit about what independent means. I'm not going to go through all the detail that's in this report. It's a 2-page report, as you can see here. But essentially boils down to these bullet points. And that's that management, which is city officials and whatnot, is responsible for the preparation and presentation of the financials. We, as the auditor, we're responsible for expressing an opinion on the financials based off our audit. And the good news is, kind of like Andy mentioned, that in our opinion, the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the city as of June 30, 2021. So that results in an unmodified or clean audit opinion. No issues to note within, again, these 2 pages here. There's a lot of jargon to essentially boil down to this. So again, excuse me, the financials themselves, there's hundreds of pages. We try and find a different way kind of every year to boil this down to the most simplistic terms for a quick presentation like today. So this slide is showing essentially the statement of financial position or the balance sheet on the date June 30, 2021. So this is a point in time. And the financials that back this up we'll see in a couple slides, but this summary kind of is much easier to digest. So at that point in time, the city had total assets of just over $1 billion. Those assets are in these different categories, the main categories such as cash, investments, receivables, and capital assets. Capital assets is the major category that makes up those total assets. Those are things such as equipment, buildings, vehicles, roads, infrastructure, items that you put cash into, but you can't necessarily cash out, right? They're not financial assets that you can use. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. The total liabilities then is essentially what you owe. Okay, so the $332 million, those are accounts payable, accrued wages, long-term debt. Basically, the difference from what you have is what you owe, right? So then, from an accounting equation, total assets minus your total liabilities is your net position. If you think about this from a personal perspective, it's like your total assets minus your debt is your net worth. It's a very similar equation, just a little more complicated due to the accounting equations that you get there. But the net position for the city then was $866 million. And again, of that total, $667 million is what's invested in capital assets. So again, that's our non-financial type assets. Also within that net position, there's the restricted portion, and that's $79.4 million. That's restricted for things such as debt payments or loan covenants, things like that. Then the remainder is what's considered unrestricted. So in 2021, the unrestricted portion was $119 million. For comparison, last year, the year before, it was $91.3 million. And when we say unrestricted, that doesn't mean that that is completely open and free to use. It still has, it's been appropriated, or it's within the individual funds, or it's allocated to be spent on some sort of a future project or something of the sort. Doesn't just mean it's sitting there to be spent. Also, at June 30, the unrestricted portion is a little bit higher than many other months because the May tax payments come in, and basically use that to cash flow for the next 5 months until November tax payments come in. So at that point in time, it's a little bit buoyed just by timing of receipt of those payments. Okay, and then this is the detail to kind of get what we just discussed on the summary piece. Again, not going to go over this detail. There's too much to just kind of explain. You really got to take your time to run through it. This is the second page of that same statement of net position. Okay, then we get into the income statement side. So now we're looking at it from revenue minus expenses equals your change in net position or net income, essentially, right? From an accounting perspective. Not from a cash flow perspective, they're different. So you got to keep that in mind when you're looking at these numbers. So the revenue from all sources for the year was $279 million, coming from sources such as charges for services, grants, contributions, property taxes, the federal and state shared revenue, and investment earnings. Then from that, the expenses from all sources of $221 million. The different categories where that is spent are things such as general government, public safety, public works, culture and rec, solid waste, airport, and water, wastewater are some of the major areas where those expenses come from. So a similar equation here, you take your revenue minus your expenses, that equals your change in net position. And for the year, that was $57.8 million. Now again, that's not cash, because as noted here, a lot of that increase is attributed to increased capital assets. So for example, if you spend $40 million on capital improvements at the airport, that's $40 million cash being expended, but from an accounting equation, that doesn't reduce your net position by that same amount all in that same year. Because that's a capital asset, you take that expense over time, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So that expense for making that building larger takes time to impact the bottom line. Hopefully that makes sense. I know it's not the same as cash. It's fun accounting stuff. So this statement here is the detailed explanation of the summary from the previous page. And again, you just have to take some time, read through this, and kind of see how that all lines up as far as where the revenue sources are and the different categories, the functions, the programs where they're being spent. Okay, then another big area of our audit that we focus on is called the single audit section. Kind of a weird term. It basically means federal funds, federal grants, and how they were spent and used. So it comes with a different set of rules than just your typical accounting, different set of audit requirements and a different way to look at those individual grant monies and how they were spent. So for example, last year the city spent $36.9 million in grant funds in 2021, which was a significant amount. Majority of that is coming from the CARES Act and the airport funds. Those were the largest grants. In total, those made up about $30 million of the 36.9. If we compare that to 2020, total grant funds spent were $23.4 million. So it was a significant increase from 2021. Again, Most of this is due to the COVID funds that are coming from the feds and from the state. I don't have the number here, but if we went back to 2019, total grant funds spent were probably 12 or 13 million as a more normal baseline level. So with that, we ended up testing $32 million approximately of the 36.9 as the major programs. And again, that requirement comes down from the specifics of the grant and from the federal requirements telling us what we should test, what we're required to test. And happy to say that we also have no findings to report on those federal funds. Then in addition to the audit and the single audit, we have a couple other reports that we are required to do. They're considered agreed upon procedure engagements. They're just a step down from what an audit is, a much more simplified set of testing. First one's called the passenger facility charges, the PFCs. That is required by the FAA, basically a way to account for the accumulation of the passenger facility charges that are received, and then how they're spent and how they're used. So it's an ongoing requirement, must be done every single year to satisfy the FAA. And the other one is the building permits fund, and this is a state requirement. So Montana state law requires the building permits to have a specified set of procedures to test it every single year and basically report back to the state on their specific requirements. And for both of these as well, nothing worth mentioning as far as reporting or anything like that for those two engagements. So again, very, very clean year. A lot of hard work, a lot of dedication by Andy and his staff and the city staff around the city who help do these different engagements. So we didn't quite take 2 hours, but are there any questions, anything that you'd like me to go over or explain?
Councilor Boyette.
You've had some no findings. What happens if you did find something significant or out of order or anomaly? What is your procedure?
Yeah, so it depends on the level. So again, when we're talking about materiality, let's say we do find something for $500, right? We might mention it, and if staff wants to correct it, we'll give them the chance to make that change. For us, from the audit perspective, it's more so just, hey, FYI, here's something we found and you can change it. Let's say instead that $500 is $1 million. Now it's to the level where, all right, here's an issue, needs to be corrected, what happened and how do we fix it? And if it gets to the level where it needs to be reported within the financial statements, then it goes on a separate letter, and that letter essentially says, here's what we found, here's its level of significance, and what you need to do to fix it. And we've had those in the past. One of the benefits, if you will, to having such a large organization is that, again, if it's a $1,000, I don't want to say discrepancy, but error, mistake, or change, it doesn't rise to that level of needing to be reported. So it takes a larger amount to get to that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Tyler? Councilor Ripsis.
Tyler, thanks for mentioning that the net position is kind of comparable to our own personal net worth and how we should be thinking about that. I'm new to council, and I was trying to understand how to think about net position, and that was the closest I came up with. But there's a big difference between me as a person or as a household and the government, and that is, if I have capital assets on my net worth statement, like my house, I don't expect to outlive the useful value of my house. I don't expect to have to, tear my house down and completely rebuild it because it's just past its useful lifespan. Whereas a city is essentially permanent, and we do. We have lots of capital assets. In fact, the vast majority of our capital assets are things like roads and water lines and sewer lines and all those kinds of things that we expect our city to outlive. And so we expect that we will have a long-term liability related to those assets. It might be 10, 20, 30 years from now. But we do have that every time, a developer completes a subdivision and they put in roads and water lines and sewer lines. We start showing that asset on our capital assets and our net position, but we don't seem to account for anything that says 30 years from now we're going to have to replace that road. And maybe in the short term it should be trivial, but as we get towards that lifespan, that seems to be a pretty large liability. And if we go through a large growth period, it might not hit us right away, but 20 years from now, we could be looking at our net position thinking we're doing really great, where in reality, we've got a very large it's turning into a near-term liability in our infrastructure. So can you help me understand what net position really, how we should be thinking about that without that piece of that long-term liability in there? Is it just an accounting thing that we shouldn't worry about, or?
That would make it easier, right?
Yeah.
I mean, from my realm, we do, we don't think about too far into the future, right? Because we're talking about a point in time. But certainly from your perspective, that matters. And you're talking about deferred maintenance, you're talking about deferred projects and things you got to do down the line, right? And roads and buildings you have now, they still cost money to maintain and repair and all those things. So that's when you talk about budgets, right? Long-term budgets and capital improvement plans, right? When you're looking at the long-term future and how to build net position to build to be ready for those, or are you going to take out debt to cash flow them when the time comes? So you kind of look at that from multiple perspectives, right? It's not, you don't want to have your net position be nothing and then be forced to only accumulate debt to get new capital assets, and you don't want to go the other way either, where you don't take on any debt, because some debt's good, right? Some level of it can be good. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question or just kind of going in a circle here, but basically, net position, it's got a lot of value to it, particularly with the level that's here, the 119 million. I believe it was about 100 million of that is for within the enterprise funds. So that's water, wastewater, those sorts of funds that are building their own net position so that they can fund future growth and new assets and things like that.
Follow up then Chris Kukulski.
So how do those assets build the net position besides just the value of itself, which is depreciating? I'm missing that connection there.
It's not building upon itself, but if you have a net position, that just says you're not upside down within that same fund. So if you had no cash, no assets, and just debt, right, then you'd be in a negative net position for that particular fund. So that's what you want to avoid. Now, yes, some of that net position, not within the unrestricted, but in the net position total, includes those capital assets that are being depreciated and reducing their accounting value every single year. And that's where you can't have all your eggs in one basket, right? You can't have all of your assets in capital assets, because you can't turn those to cash as easy as cash. Is that?
Chris, you had something?
I appreciate the question. I just genuinely appreciate. To me, it's critical that as a policymaker and administratively that we are conscientious of that. I think of the life expectancy and what is our annual replacement. So one area where you'll identify it fairly straightforward is when we talk budget and we talk about how many millions of dollars we spend each year replacing pipes in the ground. And what's the relationship of that annual pipe replacement program to the expected life of the pipe? And the good news is we're spending millions of dollars replacing pipes. And it probably shows as part of a huge chunk of that 119 million. The bad news is we think a pipe's gonna last more than 150 years or something to that extent, and we know it's not gonna last 150 years. So we've got some work to do to improve that. Equipment replacement is one of the areas we do the best at, as you've heard pretty consistently. General fund facilities is probably the area we do the worst. but for a pandemic, we had no cash set aside or substantial cash set aside to deal with a law and justice center or city hall or facilities of that nature. So I think your question is a very critical one to be conscientious of as we look at annual budgets and as we make decisions about what we invest each year in either setting aside in preparation for replacement or actually are doing replacement on the ground if it's a pipe or a street or things of that nature. So.
Thank you. Tyler, as we wrap up here, I want to just give you a softball in case you want to hit it, or if Andy does, which is, even though there was nothing that rose to the level of materiality to trigger a formal finding, was there anything that you have had in your experience here in the last couple of months working with staff that you want to comment further on, that is either something that needs work, something you want to compliment staff on, something that just is the process of being tweaked, but any further, call it, I know you said you don't give advice, but tough. Anything below that level of materiality that you want to comment on generally?
Well, so truthfully, we've been working together for, gosh, about 10 years now. So we have a really good set of, here's what we're gonna request, and then on top of that, when we make additional requests, we have a good formal way to go back and forth and go over those documents. A well-supported staff. So there's about 7 individuals within finance that we work with. So there's a lot of depth there. So if somebody's out or somebody's taking over another position, we have people we can work with. I'm trying in the back of my head to find some constructive criticism to add at this moment. It's an audit itself is it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of work. Our audit firm puts in between 400 and 500 hours to complete the audit. Finance staff probably puts in quadruple that, right? Just to be prepared and to be ready. If they weren't prepared, if they weren't ready, we wouldn't be presenting right now. It would be months or months down the line. So that's a positive. Yeah, Andy,
Okay.
you might have to.
I will ask Andy if he could introduce his staff, and this is your opportunity.
You bet.
And then we have a question from Councilor Rowan.
You guys can stand up if you want. It's we gotta turn around. So Donna Jelm and Sarah Lane and Jim Houck, they are the 3 accountants in the finance department, and like I said earlier, they do 110% of the work. There are other staff throughout the city that also are involved in this quite a bit. Public Works and Airport primarily, because they have so much capital assets. So. Truly, it's their hard work all year long, and then especially during the audit, making sure that we succeed every year at this. So, thank you very much.
Mayor, if I could offer just a thank you as well. I've been fortunate enough to work in organizations that usually it does look like. I mean, sometimes there are comments, but they're pretty minor in scale. But I'm fairly certain that if this were not the case, this would be a big deal. It would be a big deal to you politically. It would be a big deal to the public. It would be a big deal to us administratively. And it's not necessarily the norm that they're as clean as this is. It comes from not the hard work, but also, thankfully, a culture, an organization who's been doing this for many, many years and understands just how important it is that this is clean and done right. And that's not to say mistakes aren't ever made, but they really are on a pretty minor scale relative to what it could be.
Okay, thank you. We will have to open for public comment, but before we do so, Councilmember Owen.
Yeah, just a quick.
And Councilmember Denise?
Just a quick question, Andy, for you, sort of along this same vein. So audits don't offer opinions on the effectiveness of internal controls, but I'd like to hear your opinion on the effectiveness of our internal controls. If you could go through them quickly, and if you see any, not all of them, but like the big ones. And if you see any areas for where you might like to improve, or where we maybe could do a little better.
Thanks for the question, Councilmember Owen. So with respect to internal controls, one of the advantages that we have at the City of Billings, as Tyler mentioned, is some depth with diverse employment. So one of the strong things with internal controls is having separation of duties. So your person writing the checks isn't also the person reconciling the bank account. We have enough staff that we're able to segregate those duties and then frankly make fraud really, really challenging for someone to participate in at the city. So I guess that, very generic is kind of our main internal control. Again, we have a pretty robust accounting system that limits people's controls on where they can access, what funds and accounts are allowed to charge to, who's allowed to approve invoices, who's allowed to submit invoices. So there's a lot of limitations there as well put in place. With respect to what we could improve upon, I don't know how to answer that. I generally don't have like a burning item that we really need to do this. We do really need to stay up on good software security. I mean, that's primarily where we're going to see anything. I think these days it's going to be, anything financial is going to be electronically done. So we just really need to make sure we've got good security, good controls in place there, and invest in good software there. Yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. Andy, this is just a suggestion. I think when you and I have had conversations regarding different fund balances and expenses and stuff, that could be a helpful improvement in the software to say, hey, if we spent so much on a project, what's the current spend? Right now, I know you have to go through a lot of different rigmarole to get to that. So that would be helpful if we need to assist you with some updates to software. Let us know because it's hard to get some of that information. I know. But I do have a question for the auditor. You mentioned that, again, this is not through all the transactions. You're doing taking a sampling. I'm sorry if I missed this. What is the number of samplings? Is it based on percentage of total transactions? And if it's just a fixed number, what percentage of that is of the total transactions of the city is actually being touched?
Yeah, so it's, there's not just one size fits all answer for that. Basically, when you look at the materiality by fund, that's how you determine the sample size depending on the test that you want to perform. So for example, say we're doing you're going to get some accounting jargon now, but you asked for it. So subsequent disbursement testing. So we're looking at checks that are being written after year end to determine if they're included in accounts payable appropriately or not. We'll look at all the checks written for, say, the month of July. And maybe that's $10 million worth of checks. Then we basically run that through a statistical sample to determine how many transactions we need to test in order to be statistically significant to say whatever our results are, we could extrapolate that to the population. So say for 2 million and you look at materiality, maybe we'll just say it's $100,000 for that particular fund. So maybe the statistical samples, we have to select 75 transactions or 150. And so we run that through, and if everything is essentially within a level of margin of error that's acceptable from a statistical perspective, then you can extrapolate that to the whole.
Okay, Mayor, quick follow-up on that. So that's good to know. So you're looking for a statistically valid sample when you do it, if I understand that correctly. So what is your statistically valid sample or margin of error that you have to meet to an actual to say it's good?
So in general, there's a grid, so it depends on how many deviations we anticipate finding. Let's say we anticipate finding 0 deviations, then we have to have X amount that we're looking for. If we expect to find, say, 2 deviations, then we can have a larger sample. So usually we go with 1 or 2 deviations. And if we're at a moderate risk, I want to say it's about 1%. But it depends on the size of the sample. It's a fluctuating percentage, if you will, based off how big a sample is.
Okay, and one last quick follow-up on that. Okay. The audit that we hire you to do, does that have anything, as far as what we hired you to do, can we say we want a more statistically valid sample or a less statistically valid sample? Or is it, that is the industry standard that you adhere to, and that's the only option we have to
Well, yeah, so technically, if it's statistically valid, it is regardless of whatever size
Okay,
we select.
great. Thank you.
But we do always, like, if there's additional testing that's requested in a certain area or a certain account balance, then we'll just do more testing there. Or if we, using our auditor's judgment, determine this looks a little different than we'd anticipate, then we would bump up our testing to satisfy that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's try to wrap up here. So we go to public comment. Councilmember Boyette?
I'm sorry to ask this question, but Chris, in the banking business, we never had an auditor last more than 5 to 7 years. This auditor has been here 10 years. When we changed auditors, we actually found different issues because people got into friends or relations. So do we have a procedure for that?
Yeah, so bidding that works. I'll be curious where we are in the bid cycle. And yes, I would anticipate that, at a decade that there'll be some point. Can you remind me, Andy, where are we and how many years have we bid it and where are we at in that cycle right now?
So I think we have 1 more year left on the contract we're with, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And I think our last contract was for 6 years total. So that'll be the 6th year of that one.
And so I think there is. It's not an uncommon question or potential practice, which is, okay, should you be using the same firm more than one cycle or 2 cycles, and at 10, the auditor doesn't want to hear this. It may be, important for us to get a new set of eyes and it's on it.
Thank you.
Andy, can you comment on that?
Mayor, if I may, I think during that term as well, though, we've actually seen a partner change. So we have had staff changes within that firm, though, as well. So they do get different people in here.
And Councilmember Boyette, Tyler did tell me in confidence that he hates Andy's guts.
Not even confidence.
Well-known secret. Anything else for public comment?
May I add one more item?
Go ahead.
That is part of what we are required to do to maintain independence. So we do rotate staff, we rotate partners when we feel it's necessary. So even if it is within the same firm, there's still a different flavor, different people performing the test. So these guys get to meet a new person or two every single year. So that is a new perspective. So even if it's not 100% refresh, every year there's change that allows some of that new perspective.
Okay, thank you. We'll open up for public comment then on the former item 3, which is now item 1, this audit. If anybody would like to comment that's here, go to the podium up there and we'll recognize you, ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address up front. And if you're on Zoom and you would like to comment, use your raise the hand feature and we'll recognize you. So I do not see anybody going to the podium here. Kevin, do we have anybody on Zoom who is indicating they'd like to comment?
We have no participants on Zoom.
No, so we will close the public comment period on item number 1. And thank you, Tyler. Drive safely. Watch for deer. With that, then we'll move to our next item, item 2, which Councilor Boyette, my understanding of your motion was not to actually swap, but just to move everything down.
No,
correct?
swap.
It was the opposite of that.
It was to swap.
It was swap, and that's okay. So what was 3 is now 1, and 1 is now 3.
2 is still.
So 2 is small cell wireless facilities. And our presenters there are our Deputy City Attorney Stacey Tenney and our Public Works Director Debbie Melling. So we'll turn it over to whoever of you is leading the charge. It looks like Stacey. Stacey, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council members. I'm Stacey Tenney. I'm a Deputy City Attorney with the City Attorney's Office. And Debbie and I have taken up the task of working on small cell regulations and hopefully an ordinance to take to you folks in a month or so. Just to begin with, I'm just going to put you on my screen here, and I'll try to get back to you later with questions and maybe show my face again. Take care. Let's see. Are you seeing that?
We are not yet.
Well, let's see here.
There
Are you
we
seeing
are.
that?
Yep, we can see it now.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, Deb may have to help me because, you know, it's a strange thing. I'm still working first G. I don't think I'll ever make it to 5G for all of this. Still back in probably 20 years ago trying to figure out how to do all this. But I'm sharing my screen here and just looking for my little... Okay, I'm sorry. I'm seeing what I'm saying show up here, and it's getting me a little confused. Okay. Deb, would you help me, dear? There we go. I found it. Okay. Okay, so we began this odyssey last summer, Debbie and I. Debbie got a call from back east from a small cell provider wanting to know what the city does in terms fifth generation small cell facilities in the right of way on street lights. And we didn't really know. And so Gina and I called around to all the other city attorneys, and no one in Montana was doing anything yet. We were able to visit with Helena. They had hired a firm, a couple of lawyers out of Colorado who have a communications firm. They've worked on cable franchises and the small cell regulations for many, many years, have quite an extensive background, and we're just starting to assist Helena with the possibility of an ordinance and a master license agreement. But in getting into this subject matter, none of us having any background or specialized legal knowledge, we started working with Bob Duchin out of River Oaks Communications in Colorado. And then I started to follow up, get into this, start reading, and pretty soon the presentation that I'm giving you tonight is kind of my generalized knowledge of this subject matter, but I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. But basically, when we talk about small cell wireless, we talk about the fact that wireless communication really has progressed. It's come such a long way just in the last 30 years. You can probably remember your analog phone back in the late 70s. It was so excited to be able to pick up your phone and walk into the kitchen or out to the yard, and you didn't have to have the wire hooked up anymore. And that was exciting stuff back then, at least in our household. And then as you progress another 25 years, you start getting into those flip phones. That was very exciting too, to have a phone that you could just put in your pocket and flip, do a little text message. And then as the years progressed, started to get on a mobile phone, a smartphone. And that's been so exciting. I think if you look at your iPhone or your Samsung phone tonight, you'll see a little 4G up on the right-hand, indicating that this is fourth generation technology. And that fourth generation technology was supported by all of these cell phone towers that came of age probably in the last 20 years. And you recognize these towers. They're up to 200 feet tall. They're widely dispersed. You don't see You don't see a lot of them in the city, of course. One up on the airport. So they're around us. They're helping us to communicate, and our devices communicate wirelessly with these big, huge antenna towers. And now we're starting this very new technology called 5th generation. You've probably heard it lately on the news. They talked about it, in fact, rolling out a couple weeks ago, and how the FAA was concerned because they were concerned that the frequencies would interfere with the frequencies used on airplane landing gears. And so all of this is just new technology within really the last 5 or 6 years. And legally, in terms of the law, let me go to the next slide here. In order to support this 5th generation of technology, instead of these massive macro towers, what the 5G technology needs is they need a closer set of antennas, more densely packed, and what the federal government and actually the Trump administration made this a national priority just in since 2017, that we roll out in this nation 5G technology. And to get it there, we need public right-of-way. Is not me, I'm not saying that, that's what they're saying, experts. And they need it because public right-of-way is able to accommodate the technology. And we'll get in just a minute. But on this slide, you can see where we have, you have these macro towers up here, and the 5th generation, in order to get through buildings, in order to have quicker service, more latency, responsive time to hook up all of our different apps that we're using now, we're having to have these low power emitting base stations and antennas to transmit our signals around all these objects. So that's where Debbie, the Public Works Director, kind of entered into this ballgame. And because I work with Debbie, that's how I got involved as well. But the 5th generation technology really has 3 revolutionary characteristics about it. The first is that it's anticipated that the data transfer speeds are going to be over 100 times quicker than the 4G technology on your phone right now. Also, the 5G is supposed to dramatically reduce the latency. And so you're going to be able to hook up and have more responsive apps without any kind of glitches. And then number 3, the 5th generation is going to increase your abilities to do all these different things. You've probably heard of smart cities. This is revolutionary technology that in probably the next 20, 25 years is going to change the way that you as representatives on city issues are looking at things. And to have the technology to, Debbie's working on these things already, but to be able to have meteorological apps that tell us what kind of saturation is in the parks and whether we need to sprinkle them or not. All these certain things. There's going to be smart grids for pollution sensors. There's very likely going to be, we already have traffic cameras, but the police, they say that 80% of 911 calls, it's a real public safety issue, that to have this kind of responsive technology is so important just for public safety. And so it's kind of exciting stuff. But how do we deploy these? This is different. This 5th generation is different than the 4G, where you just needed these macro towers. Now we need these densely packed antennas. They're smaller, they're called small cells, but they're not small per se. They're still going to take up room, and what the Federal Communications Commission has concluded in 2018, they passed an order saying, hey, you guys, in order to roll this out, we've got to require that municipalities, local governments do not effectively prohibit the deployment of small cells in the right-of-way. We need rights-of-way in order to attach these to streetlights, utility poles. We already have the infrastructure there, folks, so let's use it. And that's what the FCC has ordered. And so right now, as municipal representatives, you don't really have a choice. This technology is coming, and all over, whether it's here, Missoula, Helena, Great Falls, Bozeman, all of these cities, including our own, are going to have to accommodate small cells in our right-of-way. It's required. And so how do we do this? Well, the FCC has said, look,
Speaking of technology,
you can look at aesthetics. We're going to allow you to require some accommodations for aesthetics. We're going to allow you to have some accommodations for safety. And you're going to be able to charge a fee to be in the right-of-way on a street light. But it doesn't have to be a cost basis. You're not going to make any money off of this. And so this is kind of how
I apologize, Stacy, I apologize. You cut out there for about 30 seconds. Right before you were saying that we can't prohibit installation in the right-of-way. Then you moved on to that we can control safety and aesthetics. But in between there, we lost you for about 30 seconds. So I'll just ask you to look back. Was there anything? I know you don't know where we lost you, but if you can do a very, very quick summary, and then I'll ask you to try to wrap up as quickly as you can. We're going into 15 minutes, and we do have to get to our first item as well before we break. So go ahead.
You know, I'm just doing this off the cuff, Bill, so I'll just continue on here. This slide here talks about the deployment. And so you can see on streetlights what we're looking at, utility poles. And then oftentimes the FCC has said that, look, if your poles can't accommodate this, then these providers can have their own poles and they can put them in the right-of-way. So what Debbie and I are doing right now is, you can see the definition of right-of-way here, folks. And if you've never dealt with the issue, Debbie deals with this on a daily basis. But she's dealing with rights-of-way, which is real property dedicated in the public trust for the public use for purposes of maintaining streets and street improvements. And so we've got to allow these in, and this is what we have to look at. The right-of-way is important, the FCC says, because it has already a lot of important things to support this technology. It has oftentimes fiber optic cables already. It has power sources already. Now, Northwest Energy, I could see that there was a string of emails today, of course, Northwest Energy will have to energize these possibly, and they'll have to figure out how to do that. The city won't be in the electrifying business. And then we have the structures already to possibly accommodate these. They may not. And that's where a review and setting up an ordinance will allow us to figure out how the design, the density and location. Debbie and her group would look at that. And then we look at recouping the costs of the review and the right-of-way management. The federal, the FCC has indicated that, again, the cities cannot financially benefit from these costs. This is so important, they say, to our nation as a whole, that we cannot recoup anything other than our cost basis for right-of-way usage. They've set some safe harbors in that realm, and so you can see here there's some fees for applications. I believe the gentleman today from the Chamber of Commerce who emailed was talking about batching. Yes, we will provide for batches of these, so this will not just be one cell facility at a time. We would look at several if a provider is seeking that. We will also look for an annual fee in the right-of-way. And then the other conversation piece that came up tonight was, what about radio frequency emissions? Is there anything we can do about that? It's a very concerning health issue. If you pull it up on Google, you're going to see pros and cons on both the issues. But the federal government in our United States Code Annotated prohibits local governments from having anything to do with setting an RF, a radio frequency emission standard. And they've indicated that no state or local government or instrumentality thereof may regulate the placement, construction, and modification of a personal wireless services facilities on the basis of the environmental effects of radio frequency emissions, to the extent that such facilities comply with FCC's regulations concerning such emissions. So, in other words, you're not going to have a choice here. If it's in compliance, the facility, with the FCC set emissions, it's a done deal. It's not anything that you can take into consideration and preclude small cells from coming into the city right away. So finally, an ordinance that Debbie and I are looking at, we're trying to draft with the help of specialized legal counsel, is an ordinance that's going to govern the placement of all cells in the public right-of-way. It would be overseen by Debbie, the Public Works Director. It would establish application process. There's certain shot clocks that the city has to timely review and get back to the provider. On co-locations, that's 2 months, 60 days. For a new tower, or excuse me, a new pole that they're going to provide, we'd have a little bit more time, 90 days. But the FCC has really tightened up this review process over the last 3 years. And of course, we're going to try to regulate basically aesthetics. And Councilmember Neese is always concerned about undergrounding, and we will request that in the ordinance in the sense that it's technically feasible. But the FCC has said that you cannot require all undergrounding, and it really it has to be whether it's technically feasible, and if it's not, then it would effectively prohibit a small cell facility from coming in, and it's just not going to happen. So that's basically where we're at, and I'll open this up if Debbie'd like to add anything.
Thank you. Debbie?
Thank you. I think Stacy hit everything. The bottom line is we're going to have master license agreements for these. We're going to manage them on a case-by-case basis, and you will see the ordinance come and you'll see the master license agreement. So we really wanted to just give you the background behind what you're going to be seeing in the future.
Great. We'll open up for questions. I'll start. Debbie, who's looking to do this? Are we likely to have 1 or 2 providers across the entire city, and that's it? Or we're going to have as many small cell antennas as we have cell providers today, which might be 2, 3, 4, and if so, how do you co-locate on the same pole? Each one's about the size of a 30-gallon garbage can, right? So how does that work?
So there are limits to what we'll allow on each pole. You do have to look at interference. You have to look at the structural capacity of the poles. So my guess is, given the type of poles we have in the city, we're going to be having 1 of these facilities per pole. As far as what we're going to see, we've had a couple of inquiries already. And from what we're hearing, these aren't going to be large companies. These are going to be smaller companies that do a rollout for a particular neighborhood or a particular part of town. So for instance, the first one we've seen is the East Billings Urban Renewal District. It's an underserved area. And so the first person we've talked to really wants to just have a small rollout to that specific part of the city. So I anticipate more organizations will be looking at this.
Okay, thank you. Questions now for Debbie or for Stacy? Councilmember Neese.
Debbie, did I understand you correctly? So if you have 3 providers, you have to have 3 separate polls?
Probably. So they can be spaced a few hundred feet away. So what we would probably do is stagger them. We have multiple poles, streetlight poles per block. So we would probably stagger the different entities that want to use them. But they would need, a small cell would come in and maybe need 2 per block or 1 per block.
So 1 per block, you have 3 carriers, you got 3 per block is what you're looking at. Is there no way that they can do a sharing per antennas? Looks like we lost her.
Debbie, if you're talking, we're not hearing, and you're frozen, so we'll delay here a little bit. The question was co-location. I guess it's interference issues and the capacity of the pole itself. Stacy, I don't know if you're with us. I don't know if you can comment on that. It looks like
maybe we lost them.
Everybody's coming back. Debbie, we see your.
Did I lose you there?
There you go. Yep, you're back with us. We can hear you. Did you hear Councilmember?
I turned off my video just in case. It's been pretty glitchy tonight.
Yeah, Debbie, did you hear Councilmember Neese's question about putting multiple antenna on the same pole?
I did, and the answer is if the structure can handle it, yes, you can put as many as you want on one pole. Alternatively, they could put up one pole and multiple antennas could share that one pole that's just dedicated to antennas. So yes, you can share if there's capacity.
So,
okay.
Can you share antenna?
Can multiple users share one antenna?
Right.
Yeah.
They can.
They can.
I don't know.
I do not believe they can share the same antenna.
Everybody has their own antenna, just as with a regular cell system today, right?
That's correct. They would have their own antenna, but they could share the same pole.
Okay. Other questions? Councilmember Ripsis.
Yeah, I guess I'm just a little confused. There was a slide that showed the 3 different types of antennas were cabinets, the small cells, and it said there was a cabinet next to each one that said multiple wireless providers sharing or the signals being routed through those cabinets for multiple providers. Is that not an accurate slide, or and we're probably just all still figuring this out, but
yeah. That's exactly right. We're figuring it out, and I think it will depend on the companies that come in if they're willing to share those facilities. We can't force that I know of. I mean, we do have some ability to make them use one pole if we have one to try to, keep as much of the system smaller, smaller footprint. But I'm not sure if we can force them to use the same equipment. We'll have to look into that.
So my hearing, there's a sensitivity to, which we would have, of just how how many of these are all over the place.
Yes.
Okay, Debbie, Councilmember Purinton, you're pointing to somebody had a question? Or?
Casey has his hand up, and Kevin has his flag up. So.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, very good. So Casey Williams, our Disaster Emergency Services person, I guess would like to comment here. So we'll look to Casey, then we'll come back to our City Council. Casey, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the blowout of 5G across the nation is one of the Department of Homeland Security's 3-5 projects across the nation. The ultimate goal, according to Department of Homeland Security and FEMA, is to have those type of antennas that Debbie and Stacy were talking about be multi-carrier capable, so that you would have this network of antenna throughout a particular part of the community, but your cell phone providers or your internet providers would, ultimately the goal is to have the infrastructure of the antennas and then have the providers of the internet service have multiple use on each antenna. So that's ultimately the goal, at least according to Homeland Security and FEMA. I don't know what the FCC wants to do, but that's how that was presented to us.
Okay, thank you. Debbie, can you comment on the size of the cabinets? In particular, if they're sitting on a sidewalk, what's the footprint and the impact on pedestrian traffic around them, especially on a 5-foot sidewalk? And then Councilmember Neese?
We haven't been submitted any specs yet on any of these. It's been conversations that were larger picture to date. Obviously, we will make sure that it doesn't impede pedestrian access. It may have to go in a vault, or it may have to go off to the back of the sidewalk, or they'll have to create another sidewalk, something to continue that pedestrian access.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I would suggest when that comes into talking, we try to get them, require them put in vault underground so we don't have to have these in the sidewalk. The question on the poles are they, the tall towers are lit because of the FAA and you don't want to hit it with an airplane, stuff like that. Are these poles going to have lights on them blinking at night, all night long, or are they low enough that they don't have to be lit up? Any lights on them at all?
So from what I've seen, they would go on the top of our existing streetlights, and they would be another 2 to 3 feet basically on top of our streetlights. So no, I don't believe they would need any kind of flashing light.
Well, the standalone poles, I'm thinking about neighborhoods that have all underground utilities. There are no light poles, nothing like that. So if those standalone poles go up, they're not going to have lights on them in any way or another? Do you know?
We haven't seen any particular specs on any of the equipment. They're not tall facilities. Most of what we're seeing are in the 20-foot range.
Okay, thank you. Further questions, Councilmember Purington?
I guess one of my questions is, one, are there other cities that in other parts of the country that have done this so you can see what it looks like? And I guess my other comment would be, this is the FCC, which is a federal agency that is dictating to local government. Has this been tested in the legislature, the federal legislature, Congress? Whoops.
Maybe I can take that, Brenton. Yes, there are other areas of the country, other cities. In fact, I think there's roughly 25 states that have already passed small cell legislation in their state legislatures. Montana has not. I think there's probably roughly another 15 states that are considering that. Again, I don't think Montana is. So the FCC preempts local governments in this area. So we are dictated to, and yes, this has been hotly contested. In fact, this 2018 FCC order went before the Ninth Circuit, which we are in. And I think the fall of last year, 2021, might be 2020, my memory may fail me here, but the Ninth Circuit has said they've upheld the 2018 FCC order as a requirement to come into right-of-ways for small cell regs, and that the FCC conditions in terms of making sure that you cannot effectively prohibit this, that RF standards can't preclude this. The only thing that did say was there were some aesthetics where a city have some say in terms of making sure that you use a cell equipment that's going to kind of camouflage this as best as possible. They've also allowed cities to obtain for review and for a yearly license, but again, those are on a cost basis, and they've set the Ninth Circuit upheld very.
Stacey, I think we've lost you.
A year.
Oh, there you're back. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Any further questions for Debbie and Stacy before we go to public comment? Do not see any. So we'll open it for public comment. If anybody is with us today, go ahead to go to the podium, or if you're there on Zoom, use your raise hand feature if you would like to comment. If you do comment, we ask you tell us your name and address and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Kevin, do we have anybody on Zoom looking to comment? We do not. So there's nobody present here in person, so we will close our public comment period on this item. We will monitor this. I assume, Chris, staff will be coming back. Any other comments by council? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I kind of liken this to the marijuana legislation that went through the state. It was passed. We don't have a choice. We have to address an ordinance. And so as we address this, I think we need to know where our limits are, what we can and can't do, what we want to do. I think technology is great. I think I look forward to something like that. New technology is always a little scary. When she explained that they were going to be having pollution monitors and stuff like that, I think we can write stuff in there that says, no, you can't do that. Or no, I think a state law states you can't have cameras and stuff like that. So that's understandable. So I think that we need to make sure that what we can write, we need to know what we can say no to, and then also what we want to say yes to. I think aesthetics is going to be very important. And I hope that we have some ability to take a look at different designs. And I would like to see some examples from around the country if it's actually happening. That's what I would like to see as well. And so I guess that's why I look at it, and hopefully staff can bring back to us some more examples and maybe even give us, before this ordinance comes, maybe some additional work sessions on what they're seeing, what they're having, and that. So that's kind of where I sum it up, and I'm just looking for more information on this. This is a great introduction, but we need more information.
Absolutely. It'd be great to get some status reports along the way before it's just popped on us. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I think there's a kind of a misunderstanding. I think that Stacy was talking about smart cities. Smart cities is about collecting data for municipalities to be able to manage through use of data. So I think that was a kind of different concept than maybe attached to any of this. So smart cities is a different concept. It's a way in which cities and municipalities use data in order to manage cities. So the camera thing, I think you misunderstood that. I think she meant as part of smart cities, some of the things that they do in collecting data. But I think there's a little bit of a miscommunication there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess the only thing I would comment, though, those are different concepts. The smart city construct assumes that you've got a lot of data. Mm-hmm. And the ability to transmit that often is presumed to require 5G, so they do get linked, connected. Anything else? I think we need to move on then to what was originally item number 1. We do want to get this wrapped up before any sort of a break. Our Casey Williams is our presenter on disaster and emergency services update. Casey, we apologize for having done a little bit of a bait and switch on you, but we appreciate your patience. So with that, our disaster emergency coordinator, Casey Williams, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council, for letting me be here today. I'm going to go over the purpose of this was to introduce emergency management to some of our new council members, as well as to just update the regular council on what DES is, just a reminder, and some of the things that we're working on in the county as well. I'll try to run through these relatively fast. And I'll try to share my screen and we'll get started here. Can you see that?
We can. We're also seeing your thumbnails down the left side if you care.
It doesn't bother me. Well, how do I get rid of that?
Just go on.
How's that? Maybe that'll be better. I don't know. Either way, Yellowstone County Disaster and Emergency Services is the lead agency for Billings, Laurel, Broadview, and the county as it concerns the DES office is part of the overall government structure in Montana. DES is housed in the Department of Military Affairs, and then each of the local DES offices are a branch of that DES office at the state. We work with state, tribal, nonprofit, public partners. The FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security are the guiding entities that rules and regulations, guidance, and give us advice on how we move forward and grant stuff. Am I still being heard okay?
Yes, you're coming across fine.
All right. So part of what I wanted to talk about, and let's see if this is going to move for us. Is it moving?
Yes.
All right, you should see the disaster and emergency chain of command. So whenever we have a declared emergency, a disaster, or a major incident, this is the organizational chart that the city would go to as it pertains to disaster and emergency chain of command. So we would have the mayor, the city administrators, the DES office, and your public information officer is the executive group that looks at policy and makes the executive decisions. And then that breaks off into the healthcare entities, and then our public safety people, the fire, police, sheriff, public works, 911, all of the other entities there. I just bring it up, give the council the opportunity to see this is where they fit in the overall disaster and emergency. So if we have something in the city of Billings, you are part of the executive group when we get into the structure on how we deal with it. As we move into the Emergency Operations Center, with the Emergency Operations Center being the place where we help to support and organize any disaster, and we would be supporting the fire department, public works, the police department, all the people that are out mitigating and responding to emergency. Again, you are part of the elected officials and executive leadership. Y'all are part of the policy-making group at the top of that organizational chart. And then as it moves down, our transportation, fire, search and rescue teams, EMS, all of that fall under the operations side of the organizational chart. And then, of course, you also have the incident command structure, which is set up at the incident. So the emergency management doesn't run the incident. They support the incident and help to coordinate all of the agencies and entities that are responding to it. Let's see here. Did that move?
Yes.
For some reason, it's not showing up on my screen as it's moving like it's supposed to. So the city council or the executive leadership, when our emergency operations plan, which the city approved and went to in 2019, is based on an emergency support function basis. What that means is pretty much any hazard that we have, any emergency or disaster that we have, by and large, the same set of resources are needed to respond and coordinate with it. So whether it's a fire, a flood, a tornado, a civil disturbance, you still need people and things to deal with it. So the law enforcement and the fire personnel and public works that are out dealing with the disaster would call into the Emergency Operations Center or call into DES and say, hey, this is a really big deal. We need some support. And these emergency support functions are set up to provide all of the resources, manpower, assets that we can get to manage a disaster. The executive leadership, which happens to be the city manager and the city council and the mayor, y'all have important roles in that emergency operations center in that you are directly responsible for the 4 ESFs that you have here. You're the executive and policy-making group for emergency management. You are the policy-making and executive group for the financial aspect of logistics support, because you can pull the trigger and give permissions to use certain properties and certain assets, and you also have the ability to pull the trigger on funding. Long-term community recovery actually falls directly in your lap. Y'all are the ones that are responsible for making sure we have a good recovery from whatever the disaster has so that we can get our economic and community back on track. And then the external affairs when we deal with other government agencies and such like that. So you play a really big part of it. And it's my job in DES to help educate and foster that executive leadership when we do open an EOC or when we do have a disaster or an emergency that escalates to that level. The next series of slides I'll go through relatively quickly. And I just want you to think about these slides. All of the pictures I've taken here can be related back to our community, and I'll talk about each one just briefly, and then we'll talk about the group as a whole. So everybody remembers the fire we had over in Denton not too long ago, burned up a significant part of Denton. Their fuel package and surrounding areas is not much different than what we have surrounding Billings. So these type of things are just as likely to happen in Billings and in the Yellowstone County as they are anywhere else. Train derailment. Of course, we're all familiar with the Amtrak derailment. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the coal train derailment that happened in Yellowstone County not too long ago. We have transportation accidents. We have 2 major interstates and then some major highways that run through our county and our city. We all remember the large multi-vehicle accident that happened out on I-90 on the Yellowstone County Bridge. We experienced ditch failures and flooding. As a point of trivia, if you will, the largest disaster that has happened in Billings was the 1937 breach of the BBWA ditch that flooded downtown Billings and caused damage or destruction to over 2,000 structures back then. We had that breach last year, which we were lucky enough to plug with the excavator there. Planned events. We have a lot of planned events, and as it turns out, human-caused disasters have now reached the level of the top 3 potential disasters in the United States. On the left-hand side of these, you see that we have Billings, that's the Live at 5 downtown, and then of course we have the Montana Fair out at Metro Grounds. And on the right-hand side, the top picture is the aftermath of the shooting that happened in Las Vegas. As it turns out, I happened to have been there that night at the concert, but I was just outside the concert walls when that occurred. And then in the bottom right, you have the crushing accident that killed 8 people in Houston at a performance down in the mosh pit in front of the performance. We, of course, have tornadoes and other weather-related disasters. The picture on the far left is the Metro Park aftermath of the tornado you had on the Father's Day. So that's also a picture of that tornado there on the far right. And then the 2 pictures in the middle are 2 of the tornadoes that I was involved in that hit towns where I lived. Hazmat incidents. We live in an extremely high hazmat hazard area with the rail cars, the transportation of hazardous materials on our highways and interstates, the pipelines that go through here. the energy companies that are here, some of the other chemical companies, you name it. We have about every type of hazmat that we can think of. What you see there is, of course, you've experienced a hazmat spill on the Yellowstone River. This is a benzene spill in the lower right-hand corner on the Yellowstone River. And the center picture is a picture I took with my phone of one of the oil spills that I happened to go to. I was the first one on scene, and that was another Exxon pipeline broke behind this gentleman's house and spilled several thousand gallons of oil out. We deal, of course, with earth movement, rock slides, maybe not so much earthquakes, but we certainly have rock slides. And one of the things that worries me the most on the rock slides is a significant rock slide in the Yellowstone River could cause significant flooding. It could also damage or impede the water intake to our water treatment plant, which could shut the water off to the city of Billings relatively quickly if something like that were to happen. And of course, civil disturbances, we're all used to seeing all of the pictures of riots and everything that have gone on around the country. The top left and the bottom right picture, both of those were taken in downtown Billings. So we do have those type of things, and civil disturbance, like I said, has become one of the top threats to our community, according to the Director of Homeland Security. One of the other ones is the outcome of elections actually starting to cause civil disturbances around our community. Now, all these pictures, the reason I bring them up and I show them is I've heard for the last 3 years since I've been here, a common theme when I talk about emergency management and preparedness, and I hear, it'll never happen here. And the fact of the matter is, none of these events had ever happened there. It never happened until it happened. You've only had the roof of the Metro Park blown off once. We've only had the river oil spill break that way once. And when we have these, it's the emergency management portion of it that deals with the protection, the preparedness, the response, the mitigation, and the recovery of it. Our fire departments and our police departments are fantastic responders. But when we have major catastrophes like that, more than life safety are affected negatively. This is a FEMA report. I get these every day from somewhere. The Marshall Fire in Boulder, and one of the things I wanted the council to be familiar with is when you have big things like what happened in Denton or what happened here in Boulder, you have, in this case, 7,000 evacuations occurred. You had 1,000 structures that were destroyed. They had to open shelters. They had to come up with food. They had to come up with water. They had to come up with medical supplies for the people. You had hospital activations where they had ramped up for multiple casualties. Thank goodness they didn't have multiple casualties. They had the energy infrastructure that was damaged that has to be repaired and put back into place. That includes your utilities and your gas and your water. The transportation was interfered with, which interferes with interstate commerce and getting people to safety at some points. Likewise, we saw a big media blitz on the tornadoes that happened across Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, and Tennessee this last year in December. And again, this is a safety, health and medical issue, a sheltering issue, energy issue, communication systems were down, cell phone towers were down, multiple sheltering operations had to happen. And like most major natural disasters, it affected more than one community. And in Yellowstone County, it would be very feasible that you would have negative effects in Laurel, negative effects in Billings, and negative effects out into the county, if not surrounding counties as well. And it's the Yellowstone County DES office which is responsible for coordinating and supporting all of the response agencies that respond to it, but then also that very long recovery phase so that we try to get our community back on track as cheaply and as quickly as we possibly can. So in that responsibility, some of the things that I have to do on a day-to-day basis, we got to keep up with all of the plans that we have. That's our emergency operations plans, the city county hazmat plan, the multi-hazard mitigation plan. How do we protect our water? How do we protect our cybersecurity, community wildland fire? These are the majority of the plans that I am responsible for making sure that we have, and that they're reviewed annually, and that they're updated in the time period that they're supposed to be updated. You can see a lot of red on there. And historically, prior to me getting here, you just didn't have some of these, or you did have them, and like the County Wildland Fire Protection Plan, but it was done in 2006, so it's grossly outdated and needs to be updated. The reason we have so many of those red and yellow is, as it turns out, your DES office is only one person. And while we do get really great support from the city council and the city departments and the fire department and the police department, these plans and part of this protection, mitigation, recovery, and preparedness takes a lot of time. So everything done, but we are working on it, and I've been working on them every day. The other thing that the office does for the city is manage grants. This is a list of some of the grants that DES either writes, directly manages, consults on, or has some part of management or paperwork involved with doing this. No real reason for us to go through all of the grants. Just know that we have currently about $55 million worth of grants pending. Have about $500,000 grants currently that we're managing. So there is a lot of grant dollars, and then the biggest part of it, over $50 million is the $50 million BRIC grant that the City Public Works Department is applying for the county reservoir, water reservoir, to mitigate our reliance on one source of water. And then I told you I would go real fast and then we'll ask questions. The other thing, just so you know, when the CPSM study came out for the Billings Fire Department, they listed 35 recommendations in there. And the DES office, in conjunction with Billings Fire and the city administration, we've already touched, worked on, or have been working on at least 5 of those prior to that CPSM study coming out. And those are these here. It's the Billings Fire Department conducting a formal fire risk assessment. Some of that risk assessment is already in our multi-hazard mitigation project. And then the city fire department would narrow that down and look at specific buildings and threats and hazards from a fire standpoint here. But our multi-hazard mitigation plan does address the beginnings of what they're asked to do in that. Number 31, where the city of Billings should initiate an effort to establish an emergency management leadership team. That has been established. That team has met once and is scheduled to meet for the very second time on March the 9th. Number 32, they should designate an emergency manager from a key department. And between the fire department, the police department, city administration, and myself, those conversations have started as to what would be the best solution for that in the long term, and when we get there. The city of Billings should initiate an effort in which every city department develops a continuity of operations plan. You'll notice on the plans slide I showed a while ago, we do not have a continuity of operations plan. And DES is one of the departments that can help us create those continuity of operations plans. Those are really, really important, especially with the threat that we have from cyber security issues, as well as civil disturbances. I would imagine a time when something happened and you lost our entire IT system, either due to a riot or the building burning down or a cyber attack. How would we go about operating after we lost all of our IT and it's going to be gone for a month? How do we get back to continuing to do government operations when that happens? Or if the building that Public Works is housed in gets completely destroyed, how do we continue to provide public works service? Those are what all the continuity of operation plans would help us to address. And then the last is the city of Billings, Yellowstone, should conduct a review of the operations center. And thanks to the city administration and staff and the council, you bought this building, and they've created a functional work group with the architects on looking at how could we create an emergency operations center that's functional and useful here in the Stillwater building. So I did want to thank the city administration and Pepper Valdez and the Billings Fire Department and Chief St. John on all their hard work and helping us accomplish some of those things already. I was told to keep it as fast as I could, so I did that. Would love to take some questions from.
Well, thank you, Casey. Much appreciated. You're just a laugh a minute with these. And given your personal experience with many of these disasters, I think the best thing we could do for preventing disaster would be just buy you a one-way ticket to Hawaii or something, and that maybe would spare us some of these. I doubt it. Questions for Casey? Councilmember Boyette, Councilmember Owen.
Thank you, Casey. Over the last many years, I got to volunteer for 2 disaster planned exercises, which really were interesting. These plans you have are great, but plans don't mean anything when the disaster happens. Do you have a system for testing these plans through exercises?
Yes, we do. As a matter of fact, Yellowstone County has probably the best exercise schedule of any of the counties. We are required by law to have at least 3 exercises per year. Between the tabletop, functional, and full-scale exercises, we usually wind up with 8 or 9 a year. And then we test it at the hospital and we test at the airport. And I agree with you completely. The plans don't mean anything unless everybody knows the plan and then we follow. And in order to do that, we have to test it. And we do the test, we do the after action reports, and I have been working, and I think the Emergency Management Advisory Council that we've assembled will also help us to address the after action reports so that we'll get a little bit better at implementing plans when we have a bad day.
Thank you, Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Bernice, and Councilmember Joy.
I have a few questions, Mayor. I'll just ask one now and then defer until others have had a chance. Casey, last week here in Billings, the Bureau of Business and Economic Research came down and did the statewide and local economic outlook. And in that outlook, they indicated that all of the state is projected to have a drought year this year, and a pretty severe and critical drought throughout most of the state. And there was also recently a story that the Yellowstone River has hit its lowest recorded level in history. And we're working on some water contingencies, but it's not in place yet. So I'm curious to know if we are anticipating and planning for what might happen this summer, if we're planning for water shortages, if we're thinking about human health and safety, and if not, what can we do to help you get that moving?
So, yes, we're currently listed as severe drought. There is no expected change in that. It might actually get worse throughout the summer months. From a wildland fire perspective, we are currently gearing up towards that, having conversations with the DNRC, looking at what we can do with our co-op agreements to help mitigate some of the wildfires. With some of the potential that we have for water shortage and water rationing, I'm hoping that through the Emergency Management Advisory Council, like I said, we've only met once, but I'm hoping we'll have some of the people at the table beginning March the 9th, and then as we meet going forward, that we can look at and talk about some of those things, get the experts in the room, so we can pre-plan and have some discussion about what will we do, how will we get the word out, how is this going to look. As far as if something happened to our water supply at the moment, our only backup plan currently would be to declare a local disaster and ask the state and then start reaching out resources to pull in water, potable water. The hospitals are also going to be asked to look at what would you do if you lost water, and for how long can you sustain the patient care at our hospitals until we need to consider evacuating those.
Follow-up. Mayor, can you just,
Pretty flimsy at the moment from a drought.
Can you just talk real briefly about what a hospital evacuation would look like?
It would be horrible. The way we would evacuate the hospitals, so St. Vincent has, their corporation has quite a few larger tertiary care centers around the area from Denver and Idaho and Utah and maybe Wyoming. So they would be able to offload some of their if not all of their patients to some of their sister or part of their organization. So it would be relatively, to say relatively easy is not good, but they have a method of dispersing patients within their own system. This clinic could also offload some of their patients to some of their smaller hospitals, but Billings Clinic is the flagship. So if they were to have to evacuate their hospital at the same time that St. Vincent would be evacuating theirs, then we would have to look at hospitals around the region as well. And we would also call the State National Guard to see if they could build out that alternate care facility that we built out in 2020 as it dealt with COVID, because that facility could use or could house 90 to 100 or so of those patients if we decided to build that out. And it would probably take significant National Guard help to get us to pull all this off.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese and Joy?
Thank you. This is actually for Chris. Chris, when Casey presented this list and it says continuing government is, we don't have one. We have a lot of good directors in our department, and continuing of operations, I'm sure is probably a priority, especially in our IT. Can you speak to the fact that do our department directors have some kind of internal plan that they have for continuing operations, and maybe we need to get that together and get it to Casey so that he can say in works or something like that?
So I would say yes, but I can't say with absolute confidence across all departments, are they equal to each other? Law enforcement and fire, they deal with this regularly, as does public works. But I think to Casey's point, and the overall plan of pulling that together and making sure it's continually updated, that's an important part of us. I think following through with the CPSM recommendations and Casey's recommendations to us. So I'm not going to sit here and say, we get an A in the area. I'm confident that if we had a critical emergency tomorrow, they're prepared for that, but we can always do better. And the indication, the recommendations is this is an area to lean into.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and thank you, Mr. Williams, for a very good presentation. This is for a constituent question. employees of the school district have been getting text messages that say test, test, and emails that say test, test. So could you kind of explain that so I'm better at answering questions from constituents? Thank you.
Yes. So with our public emergency notification system, Code Red, we are required by law, now that we have IPAWS, the Integrated Public Alert Warning System, I have to do a test message every month on that. And then I was asked by a council member niece, I believe, several months ago, I can't remember exactly, why we don't test messages come out of Code Red. So once a month now we do a test message for the emergency alert system, Code Red. And it says test, test, test. This is a emergency. This is a test of the Code Red emergency alert system for Yellowstone County. No action is required. And that's the same thing that you have when you see the, you hear the tones on the radio and it says this is a test of the emergency broadcast system. It's exactly that, only it's a test of our local emergency notification system.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Bryant?
Thank you, and thanks, Casey. And I'm glad you brought up the sheltering at Metro Park, because that was one of my questions. So I'm glad to know that we can still depend on that, hopefully, if we needed it. One of the other questions that I've had, and I've asked it before, it doesn't seem to me, I come from an oil and gas town, and anytime there were blowouts or whatever, sometimes there were rail cars that crashed, other times. So the refineries had to respond, the railroad had to respond, and then of course the city, which had very minimal because it was smaller. But yet, I don't really see a lot of coordination among the entities of city, county, railroad, and refineries. And they really, it's my understanding there's some really dangerous gases that they take on those rail cars. And if something happened with those. So could you just address that to make me feel a little bit better?
Oh, and then maybe I think Chief Hopple is on here and can speak to the fire department hazmat. But what happened, so we just had in December, or I think it was in December, we had a derailment of 4 tanker cars that were hazmat tanker cars on the rail system out here. Well, if the rail system has a derailment, then the BNSF has a response. It comes and tries to respond to and mitigate any spills or hazmat issue that the train derailment had. Billings Fire Hazmat would obviously be there first, and so they would take care of life safety issues and do everything they could do to stop the leak. But they have a real good working relationship with the railroad. And then on the and I'll let Matt talk about this, on the energy company side, if the spill is within the property of the refinery, then the refinery pretty much takes care of it to the best of their ability, knowing that they could call the fire department for assistance if they need to. But they're very well set up and very capable of handling significant hazmat issues within their property. If the hazmat goes outside the boundary of their property, let's say it's a gas plume or a cloud or liquid that spills outside of their property, then that becomes the responsibility of our local fire department and hazmat team to help to stop. But Matt, please chime in on that as well, because we don't have a really good working relationship.
Chief Hopple, it's all yours.
You bet. Yeah, Mayor, Council, just to let you know, we're very fortunate, number one, to have a regional hazmat response team that exists right here in Billings. It's a very robust set of guys, gals in our department that trains every year along with all the other regional teams within the state. So that capacity that we have here is a great asset. On top of it, our relationship with the 3 refineries within our county, as well as the railroad, is a very good one. We have a mutual aid agreement that exists with all of those agencies, and we actually meet once a month to discuss any issues, they foresee coming, any operations they have in those plants, any releases they've had, problems they've had. So they're in communications with us all the time. We also do tabletops. We have pipeline tabletops. Anything and everything that can go wrong, we are discussing on a constant basis with all of these entities, just to be prepared for the worst case scenario. In addition to that, they also pay for us to travel with them down to training down in Texas, Louisiana, where all their bigger corporations are, just to be prepared for that industrial fire brigade response, and we can become familiar with their operations, and they do the same here locally. So I can honestly assure you that we do prepare at minimum once a month and communicate on a regular basis to make sure everybody knows what everybody else is doing, and we'll be able to respond when needed.
Hey, Councilor Puritan?
Just as a follow-up, Matt, since you're there, I noticed in the paper, I think it was this past week, that they're starting to come up with some new techniques for wildland fires. And since we have a lot of residential out in our county, so will the Billings Fire Department be doing anything differently in fighting those fires? I think it was a matter of water use or something.
Yeah, there's always a lot of different technology being released, but that's another entity that we have a very close relationship with, and that's the DNRC, which rests right up on our hill as well. Another great resource that we have. They're the ones that kind of provide all of our training for this area, deliver all the training at every level that when it comes to wildland. The Billings Fire Department has always been very active in the wildland-urban interface preparations. For a while there, when we were building homes up in the Rehberg area, we were very involved with how those homes were built and whatnot. But as far as firefighting tactics, that is something we look at every year and work with those entities. So yes, absolutely. Anything that we can do to improve our operations, we would be looking at, but they are the subject matter expert in our area, and so we rely heavily upon them. And we do have a lot of members within our own department that can function within that organization as well. So we have a great working relationship.
Thank you.
Thank you. Casey, question sort of about process and structure, organizational structure here. You're a county employee. Can you explain how that or is the case? Is that a statutory requirement, or do we have a MOU, memorandum of understanding, with the county? So just how does that work? And then second, the CPSM study calls for a city DES person. And you and I have talked about that, and there were 7 items, plans in the red. And I'm sure you do a great job, but between responding to all of the disasters, I guess I'm skeptical that you're going to have those 7 plans done anytime soon. So what's your understanding of maybe an alternative for getting some help, including contract out? Do you ever, your department ever contract out for help on these things? Are there dollars to pay for that? So anyway, your status as a county employee, and then how do you get help?
All right, so first of all, MCA requires that every county have a DES office. So I guess statutorily, I'm here because it's required that we have and I am a county employee in the fact that my salary and benefits are paid by the county, but my job responsibilities are to the county and all of the other political subdivisions, including Billings, Laurel, and Broadview. So while I'm paid by the county, and I'm technically a county employee from an HR standpoint, from an emergency management standpoint, I work for equally each political subdivision in the county. So I'm equally as responsible for all of the emergency management things that happen in Billings as I am in Laurel, Broadview, or the county. because that's how DES is set up in the state of Montana. The other thing is the state of Montana, and I'll get into the needing help. So yes, you're absolutely correct. I'm a strong advocate of I need help. And then the CPSM study, when they were doing the interviews and part of the interview, they interviewed me, they interviewed the fire department personnel and such like that. My lights just went off. The fact of the matter is that we have the largest community in the state of Montana, and the like communities around us absolutely dwarf when it comes to emergency management. My suggestion would be, and then I would let Mr. Iflin or Kukulski, if the city decides that they wanted to invest in expanding the emergency management, my suggestion would be, because of the way the state is set up, to go down to the county level and not the city, that it should be a department like city county planning or BACETA or the 911, where the entity pays into it, but this is really and truly a city county entity, even though my salary is paid by the county tax structure and HR. Did that answer that question?
Sure, sort of. Although it always comes down to money, I am sure. And is there a source of money that you know of that, other than just regular city general fund dollars, to pay to help you?
The only money that's available for personnel from the state or the federal level with those grants is, that I'm aware of, is the emergency performance grant, the EMPG Emergency Management Performance Grant. We are a state that participates in that grant. We get, this year, we'll get $130,000. You can use that money for anything that qualifies for EMPG. And that includes all of the salary and benefits for an emergency management personnel. That's a 1-to-1 matching grant. So if you spend $2, the state EMPG reimburses you one of those dollars. We've been an EMPG grant funded county for several years. And while I do use the EMPG grant money that's left over after we reimburse for salaries and benefits for me and the administrative secretary, Linda, the money that's left over I use for things like an emergency operations center equipment. We use it to pay my cell phone bill. We use it if we need to buy certain pieces of equipment that would help support the fire and police departments. The thing about that particular grant is the equipment and the stuff you can find money for in other grants. There's lots of other grants that you can get stuff in. There's just very few grants that will pay for people. So the EMPG grant would reimburse 50% of whatever salary and benefits, provided that that person was considered part of the emergency management department.
Okay, thank you, Casey. Council, I'll just remind us where we're at time-wise. It's 7:38. We usually try to take a break around 7:30, but I don't really want to leave this hanging. If we can quickly wrap this up, and we'll take a break and come back for our final 3 items. Council members Neese and Owen.
Thank you, Mayor. I look at this, and this is a great service the county provides for us. Remember, we are 60-70% of the county, so I think this is a great service we can use. I think what Casey's done is really good at giving us a good idea of what the plans where maybe we as a city are short. And I would ask our city administrator and council to help the city administrator to direct them to help Casey get these plans so we can get yeses and greens where the city needs to be at. And however we as a council can help with that is also let us know. But I think this is a good important to let us know. There are some holes here that maybe we can help fill in. And I look forward to seeing more of this turn green.
Thank you, Councilmember Renee, or Councilmember Owen.
So I think I have similar thoughts, and Casey, I'd like to hear your opinion on this, and Chris, yours as well. In addition to these plans that I do think should be prioritized, are there ways that we can make sure that disaster prevention and emergency preparedness are more fully incorporated into what we're doing in the city operations? So for example, do you have an opportunity to weigh in on what should be in the capital improvement plan or the equipment replacement plan to make sure we're making those DES related investments and pursuing the related federal funding opportunities? Are there opportunities to collaborate with the new PIO on communications protocols in an emergency? I mean, can we do better at bringing you into the fold in an appropriate way?
Thank you. And, yes, I believe, and I think that the step of getting the emergency management advisory group, my goal to bringing those people together is so that we can communicate better across the key departments and stakeholders, and so that we can share that type of information so that we don't duplicate efforts, and so that we get a little guidance into the emergency management. What direction do we want to go? What are the financial support options that are available? So I'm hoping that that group, which is it has public works from the county and the city, it has fire, police, the elected officials, city administrator. They're all part of that advisory group, and I'm hoping that we'll get that type of synergy with that group. And then what I'm doing today, and what I've worked with the city administrator, Mr. Kukulski and Mr. Iflin, over the last 3 years, with COVID being a big interruption, we've really worked hard to bring break down the barriers and not just consider this some kind of a county emergency management department, but it is the city emergency management department as well. And Mr. Kukulski and Mr. Iflin and the other department heads have, I think, really tried to break down those barriers and make this more of a city department than just this thing off in the distance that you don't think about. Mr. Iflin or Mr. Kukulski, if y'all wanted to.
So go, Chris, or
one piece I would add to it. So in addition to what Casey just mentioned, so just started here in the last 6 months, Casey joins us for our first tactical meeting of each month. So every Tuesday, tactical group gets together and Casey participates in that. Now, if there was something between that time, he wanted to participate in that meeting to communicate, we'd send him a Zoom invite and invite him to be a part of that conversation. So those, I think there's always been, well, I shouldn't say always, there is a level of communication that's existed long-term, but we have been working with KC's leadership to enhance that, both on his end and on our end.
But specifically about the budget or its capital improvement plans or long-term planning?
So yeah, that's a good conversation. I don't recall us going to KC and saying, KC, are we missing something? Would you have things you would put into that? We would welcome that feedback. I think it would predominantly come through the avenue of the committee and the group that he's working with, because that's where I suspect you're going to see the overwhelming majority of those things in their fire interaction, law enforcement, and public works.
Okay, thank you. Council, let's wrap this up with some public comment, if there is any, and then we'll adjourn briefly for a break. Is there anybody in there? There's nobody with us to comment in person. Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to offer public comment on this item? If so, keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address up front. Kevin, is there anybody on Zoom to comment on this item? There is not, so we'll close the public comment period on this item. Council, it's 7:43. We'll be back no later than 7:50, earlier than that if we can. dates for the budget. You've got in your packet May and June dates. There was some method to that madness that staff came up with. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy, I guess, and/or Chris to explain what's going to happen during our budget review season, and maybe for the benefit of our 4 new council members, Andy, you can describe what happens during this time period and why we even have to do this. So, Andy?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you. When we go through the budget, we end up adding in some extra work sessions because there's just a lot to get through in a short amount of time. And most of that time happens in May when we're in front of you and the public presenting the budget. So we've tried a couple different scenarios in years past. And last year we tried to consolidate a lot of it into 1 week. And while I think it was pretty effective at keeping the budget somewhat front of mind for 1 week and really hopefully trying to keep it together, it got kind of long, 3 nights in a row. And those of you that were here, I'm sure recall that. So what we're recommending this year is still the same number of work sessions, but spreading it out a little bit. So we just do 2 in May, so it'd be a Monday, Tuesday, and then the following, or 2 weeks later, the next Monday, Tuesday. And then if needed, and historically it has been, we do the work session, the first one in June, to wrap up. That way, when it comes time to adopt a budget at your last meeting in May, or in June, we have hopefully some semblance of what council wants to adopt. And so I guess I don't have much to add, Chris. I don't know.
No, I think that really nails it. I mean, these are important enough that we want to get early enough on your calendar. And yeah, traditionally, I think most common it was work sessions or extra sessions week after week after week, 4 or 5 weeks in a row. I think we learned the consolidation. We got good feedback on that, but a little bit of overkill trying to fit it all in 1 week, so we spread it to 2. So I only heard from one of you, I think, that said, yeah, this works for me. We'd like to get the nod that it works, so we'll work with it. Or if it doesn't, we'll change it.
Yeah, if we can,
I don't see any, this won't work, so we will move forward.
Well, I would like to ask Councilmember Tidswell, because these do have 2 Tuesday meetings and you're on the road.
I will make it work.
So you'll be able to zoom in? These are work sessions?
To zoom in, I'll zoom in. If I can be here, I will here. I will try to make this work for everyone.
Okay, great. Any other feedback for staff?
Start at 5:30, just like a regular council meeting.
That works for us and I think for some of those of you who are working. So if you have a different time, now would be the time to bring it up to, to talk about it. But that is our anticipated, 5:30.
Would it?
Okay, Councilmember Shaw?
I just said, would it be possible to start at 4:30 on one day? No, some people are saying, okay.
Okay, any other discussion on this item? It is an item for public comment, so we will open it up for public comment. If somebody is with us on Zoom, we will recognize you if you use that raise your hand feature, but I'm not sure that we have anybody watching, so we'll close the public comment period. There is nobody present with us. So the public comment period is closed. Any further discussion on item 4 before we go to item 5? No, Andy?
Just note, I think there was a weekly report a couple weeks ago that had anticipated moving to Tuesday meetings. Obviously, we're staying on Mondays, so those dates are no longer accurate. These would be the correct ones.
Okay, so ignore any earlier memos. Look to this one. Very good. Thank you very much. That concludes item 4. Item 5 is our possible prioritization session and leadership team retreat. Chris.
Sure, I guess if it helps, I'll stand over here. Really here looking for retreat dates. Days a week? Do we want to do a Friday, Saturday, or some other combination of days? And then what I thought to start with, once we select that, are there weeks or weekends that you say that will not work, so I can start checking things off and bring back to you here in the next few weeks, okay, here's the date, let's confirm it works for everybody. So kind of starting with you guys before we lock in on facilitator and location, want to first make sure we know what dates to stay away from. If we have to zero in on the dates tonight, great, but that's really why this is on the agenda.
And the target are generally mid-March to mid-April, is that
Yes,
correct?
thank you. That's what I was thinking would give us the time to be well prepared for that to happen.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Gillett, Councilmember Purington?
So, Chris, I think I saw someplace where you were
Wait, Dan, wait.
Yeah, just
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It'll be Councilmember Gillett?
Yeah. Friday, Saturday works for me. I think the even April Fool's Day works best for me. The first and second would be the ideal, although the two preceding and weekend following, Friday, Saturday would work for me.
Okay, thank you. I need to come back to the April 1st date, but Councilmember Purington.
Well, the first and second worked for me, but I think wasn't it a day and a half that you were thinking?
That's what I'm thinking on the outside, and then if we determine that we don't need as much time, then I can condense it easier than trying to expand it later. So yes, I would.
So my concern is that there are people here that do work.
Yep.
And some of us that don't do anything during the day. But, so even if we started like Friday evening, did a 5:30 to 8 or something just to get us started, and then planned the full day on Saturday, rather than planning 2 full days, I would prefer to start Friday evening, maybe for those of you that do work. So, and the first and second are fine. I'm more into the March through the April 1st and 2nd weekend. But other than that, I think for those of you that work, maybe if you'd like to chime in.
Thank you. I will be flexible with one exception, is I would not be available on April 1st. So that's a Friday night. That is the Mayor's first World Languages Dinner, where we'll be having a couple hundred people at the depot, about 20, 25 tables, each table speaking a different language. We've been working on the organization of that for over a year, so that one is a critical one for me, but if I were not here, I would give my proxy to whoever wanted it the most or something. Councilmember Shaw?
Nope, Joy.
Or I'm sorry, Joy.
That's okay. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm fine with a Friday all day and half a Saturday. That works okay. It's always good to have people rotate through a classroom, so once in a while I need to be gone, so they appreciate me when I come back. Just teasing. A Friday all day would be fine with me. Thank you.
Councilmember Shaw.
Now it's me. I would also advocate for a Friday all day if that's possible for the council members that I know have more stricter work schedules. My work schedule is a little more flexible. My birthday is April 8th, which is a Friday, so if possible, I'd rather not plan it over that night and into the next day. But if that's the only time that works, I will make it happen.
Mayor?
Councilmember Owen?
So just to throw my 2 cents in worth here, it is not super burdensome for me to like go Friday afternoon. A Friday all day would be harder, so I would rather sort of go Friday afternoon into Saturday. I'm concerned that by Friday evening I might be a little useless, so if we got started maybe 1-ish on a Friday afternoon and then went through Saturday, I could make that work.
Councilmember Tiswell?
I'm open for the first and second as well.
Well, he's going to be.
He's out the evening. He's out.
What you do?
Yeah, I am not available on the afternoon or evening of the 1st, but again, I'm just one person. Councilmember Neese?
Yeah, either end of March, April, I don't have any set plans yet, but, and I'd be taking a vacation day if it was an all-day Friday, so, or half day if it was half-day Friday, so I would be available at any time.
Other council members?
I'm sorry, can I ask? So for those who are working, does the Friday one is a 1 o'clock start time, does that accommodate, or should we be looking at the staying at the end of a business day? Or I guess a couple Saturdays in a row would be another way to stay totally away from a weekday. But I'm hearing that an afternoon maybe is okay if we know far enough in advance.
Did anybody want to respond to that? Councilmember Ripsis?
I'd probably lean more towards a Friday night, Saturday, or an all-day Friday, Saturday morning. Because I think it's going to be the biggest challenge in any of these things is people getting away and staying away and focusing on what the task is at hand, being present. And I think, the more we just kind of try to fit it into our normal day, the more likely we are to have, phones ringing or having to step out or, go take care of whatever. And I know it happens to me too. So I'd probably just, whatever the arrangement is, I'd rather just see it as one kind of continuous segment with an overnight in there, as opposed to trying to piecemeal it across a couple different days.
I agree.
Okay. So sort of a day and a half? Is that what we're?
Yeah, and try to get it in one lump sum. And
okay. Further comments or questions from Chris? I don't know that we have a specific date mentioned other than the April 1st date, if it would be part of a Friday or all of Friday, but is there a preference for half Friday and Saturday?
Yeah.
That would be my preference.
Okay, so that seems to be the preference, half Friday. Does that work, Chris?
Yeah.
So then the only question is which Friday?
Yeah, the only other thought that comes to my mind about Tom's comment relative to the continuity of a full day getting in discussion is, would a Monday be better? Maybe the second day comes 5 days later or whatever on the Saturday, but would your Monday's work session Monday be a better day? So no, so I'm hearing Friday afternoon and Saturday, and stay away from the first. I mean, to me, it doesn't make sense not to have, ideally want to have all 11 of you there. So stay away from the first.
And the 8th.
Yeah.
The 8th.
But if I can make that work, that's just a
Are
preference.
there any other days to stay away from?
Well, it just noting that the 8th and 9th, as well as the 25th and 26th occur before a business meeting, and so our preparation before that, typically, so in that instance, I kind of feel like the 18th and 19th might be the best in that regard of March.
So look at the weekend coming into a work session as a preference to the weekend coming into a council meeting.
I can't do the 18th and 19th. Okay.
I could do the probably got as much as we can work. I mean, I've got to try. We will stay away from the 1st and the 8th. We'll look at those other weekend days, and I'll propose maybe next Monday or the following one. Okay, here's where we're locking in. Let's get on everybody's calendar. And a 1 o'clock, early afternoon on a Friday, say 1 to how long it will take us Saturday.
Okay, Chris, can we assume that since the earliest scenario would be a little over a month, other scenarios might be closer to 2 months before this happened, that there's nothing so time critical between now and then that staff is desperately waiting for the council to speak on the prioritization of their tasks? You have your existing marching orders and you're comfortable with that in the interim?
So what I would do is, I've not heard anybody, but we've provided you the most recent adopted priorities say, it is my intention to take that off the list, so you should not waste any time or energy or resources into it. So I'm not aware, and some effort is going into both on your policy side and our staff side on what I perceive to be one of the biggest policy issues for 2022, and that is how are we going to come up with process and decisions relative to parks and recreation, all things park recreation. So to answer your question, Mayor, unless I don't believe any of you are saying do not waste your time on that, because it's not going to be a high priority, that is something we're putting effort in, but I don't think it's an effort that frankly can be avoided relative to the legislative cliff that's been created for us in 2024.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think existing priorities remain existing priorities. One issue might be preparation, like if there are significant documents to be reviewed before this event, knowing about that sooner rather than later would be good. And here I am thinking the 2017 Parks Master Plan in particular. And there may be others.
I 100% agree, and so yes, what we can start doing is identifying some of those key things are in the 2017 comp plan for parks is certainly one, as well as implementing the CPSM recommendations and public safety, which though the significant policy decisions and the resources are allocated, but the accountability isn't done and the implementation are far from done. So I mean, those would be documents I would be absolutely read that comp plan and reroute and review those 140 recommendations in CPSM, of which you just got an update a couple weeks ago or 10 days ago on where we're at on those things. So those are some very significant documents.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. I don't know how long it takes to print those off, but I would really love a hard copy of the Parks and Rec 2017. I don't think I have one.
Okay.
And I would guess others would like that as well, but.
You may have some at the Parks Department.
So if anybody does not have a hard copy, would like a hard copy, send whatever. Who should we send an email to?
Kevin and I and Mike that you'd like a hard copy. We'll make sure whether we got to print some or we have some. We'll get you a hard copy so you can be marking it up, highlighting it, and doing things with it.
Okay, very good. Further, Councilmember Purinton?
So first, one of the questions that I had for you was, a concern that I had that we're going into this with a $5,500, and you said 2/3 to 3/4 of that was for the facilitator. So can you give us some idea of what you're looking at for a facilitator? Does it cost that much to herd council cats?
So if I hire a professional council herder, I'm talking between 15 and 20. I've reached out to them. They work with councils and elected officials all the time.
Trust us, we are not worth that.
Well, I believe you are worth it. I believe it is worth the investment, but candidly, I believe I'll lose you, some of you, just by taking that first step. So where I've gone is I've localized it and reached out to find people in our community who can serve in that capacity. And in fairness to them, it does take work and effort to prepare and do a good job at it. So what I have is I do actually have a proposal, but I think you're looking at $3,500 to $4,500 for that service and work. And I'm assuming we're going to need resources and other things relative to it, but I will say we did take off. I did make an assumption we were staying in Billings, and therefore we weren't staying the night someplace else. So there is no budget there for staying in hotels. Everybody would go home, which saves money, but also puts you back in all the distractions before you come back the next day. But that is what is keeping it at roughly $5,500 instead of more than that.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Dees?
So is your intent, since we're staying in Billings, is to have it here or up in the Stillwater building or at the Park and Rec Center? I mean,
so it is to find a location where we're comfortable and is away and not and the least distracted about outside things. And I'm figuring from a budget standpoint, I'm first looking at city facilities. Do we have a good facility that'll work? And if we don't, I'm going to beg and ask, we've used them in the past, other community resources, and see if we can use their facilities. Whether there's a cost to that of hundreds of dollars, I certainly don't anticipate spending thousands of dollars to rent a local facility to have meetings in for that Friday afternoon and Saturday. But I'm looking local. And honestly, what I'm thinking in my mind is if we're successful and this goes well, then my hope is what I've shared with some of those national entities that I've had some exposure to in the past, that maybe we will be ready in the fall or next spring to really get into a strategic plan and or building off of the last strategic plan and bringing people in who have experience with that, because I believe it is worth that expertise and knowledge. But I didn't want to take that step yet because I thought I'd lose some people immediately when you saw that the bill was going to be 20 grand.
Yep. The great room at Rocky, is attractive, often used for that. Other questions, suggestions? However, Councilmember Shaw.
I guess I do have one more suggestion, which is to figure out and come up with a really good plan for public comment and how we're going to engage with the public. Because I know public will be invited, but I think it would behoove us to be able to have some conversations where we're not constantly going back to the public for feedback. So whatever that looks like, I just think spelling that out, but I think it would be nice to have some chunks of time where we're just able to focus on discussion without having to kind of bump into that other role of hearing people who maybe don't have all the information that we're trying to make decisions with.
Thank you. If I can make a suggestion to consider on that, if it's being broadcast on Facebook Live, having the public able to ask questions in writing on by email or something during the course of the meeting, and then have a staff person who could process those and maybe group them and present them to us might be a way to get public comment. That's not just the traditional, okay, you got 3 minutes, and we can do that as well. But if we're meeting for a day and a half, probably no reason they couldn't be submitting written questions along the way. Go ahead.
Could I ask, are you okay with, however we choose to handle that would be handled, say, at the end of the day, or they're asked first to make comments? Because I would tell you, in a form of a retreat, no decisions are finalized, nothing would be completed, everything of any official adoption would come to a council meeting. Folks you want to give that opportunity, but I agree, we don't want to disrupt every hour and a half, or every topic with public comment at the time of that topic. At least would be the preference to keep a flow of the conversation going, as long as that's how we would approach it.
Comment on public comment. Ed, Councilmember Deulich.
Yeah, I think my thought would be that we have the day to kind of suss things out and have some interactions that then lead us to some kind of tentative conclusions. And that's the point at which I think if you're public, that's what you're most interested in seeing, and that's where it'd be most interesting to hear comment on. But in the grinding for the sausage itself, I think it's the sausage I'm more interested in than the grinding. So I think having it near the end would be of interest.
Councilmember Neese?
I agree with Councilman Gulick on that. I think if you have Facebook Live and start answering all those questions that come in, a lot of those questions sometimes are answered in the process as you go along, and then it's the actual final, more of the meat of the subject, as you said, to answer towards the answer. I think it's just a normal public comment period. Having it through Zoom would be optional. I think that would be fine if people wanted public comment on that. But and I think having the Facebook Live is a good idea, and maybe having the questions there, but knowing that they're not going to be responded to, I think it would be good for us to go back through and look at some of those responses and questions.
And I should probably just clarify, I wasn't suggesting we would break it up. We would just give them the opportunity to submit at their leisure things that we would eventually come back to. Although I agree, holding off till the end makes a lot of sense, because then they can see what we've actually talked about. It would be, we all know that we get invested, and so I do think that it would be good if the public could weigh in, even if it's just through written proposals before the meeting itself, because many groups are going to say, hey, remember, we want you to talk about X. It doesn't do much good if after we've had a day and a half, they say, well, you never talked about my topic. So I think they need to have an opportunity to try to set our agenda a little bit at the beginning, however that works.
So Mayor,
don't know.
I agree with that. Maybe what we have is instead of just one public comment period for the whole day and a half, you have a public comment period, throughout the time, maybe every couple hours or 3 hours, you say, okay, now we're going to open up for public comment so they can weigh in at that time. And then we can move on to further discussions. And so give them a little more opportunity to weigh in, but to answer every single question on Facebook Live, I've seen some of those streams they go fast and long.
Yeah. Councilmember Purinton?
Well, I just have a question. What is the legality of public participation in this type of a meeting or retreat?
So I'd say first, you have to be able to be observed. So the public has a right to observe the conversation. There's no mandate that they give public comment for a work session style retreat discussion. You're not making any finalized decisions. At the point that you make decisions, so say adopt the priorities for the next 2 years or whatever the time period is, that can't happen without the public having an opportunity to be heard when you make that decision. My ideal is we walk out of there maybe with final draft or something, or draft, but it's not going to be the adopted document. It'll come back to the council in a Monday night meeting.
So follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
So my preference at this point would be pretty much what Councilmember Gulick was talking about, is that we need to focus on what council wants to do, what our priorities are. I think even every 2 hours, how are they going to know? How are they going to know when to comment? And so to have that type of public participation in this, I think, will be really a major distraction. And so not only will your moderator be herding council cats, but also public cats. So I just think it's going to be, I think this needs to focus in on what council needs to do. It is a retreat in that respect. Yes, for them to be able to see us, whatever that means. But as far as that public comment, I'm not sure that this is the point or the place that we need to do that.
Okay. I think we'd want our city attorney to kind of look into any sort of restriction on the opportunity to offer public comment. I think at a public meeting, there's always has to be the opportunity to offer public comment. It probably just has to be reasonable, which may not mean that it goes on for hours and hours. I don't know if, Gina, you wanted to comment on that?
Yes, Mayor, City Council must provide public comment on non-agenda matters of significant interest to the public, even when council meets at an informal work session where no action may be taken. So I think as long as there's an opportunity for public comment, whether that be at the beginning or the end or both, there does need to be the opportunity for public comment at some point, but it doesn't have to be like we do it after every item.
Okay. Anything further, Councilmember Trickey?
Yeah, so to keys, one way to deal with it would be to have any suggestions, any public comment about things that need to be considered. We could put that on an agenda for a work session just before it. So that way, we would be sure to get the information beforehand and be able to include it in the conversation that day. And then for anything that anybody wants to comment about what we talk about at the day, I think, make sure people can send in comments, send in emails, and have an open phone line at the very end of the meeting. That would be the way I'd go.
Okay, and just to clarify, were you saying at the work session beforehand, solicit input from the public saying, what do you think we should be talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, in any event, we probably want to get this message out to the public that this will be happening, and what send us an email, send us a letter, make phone calls, whatever, just so that there's no surprises. Anything else before we have public comment on how to do public comment?
What dates are we at now?
We don't have a date.
We're not going to do it on that April Fool's weekend.
You're not?
We're not doing it there.
Oh.
The mayor's not available.
I can't do it the next weekend.
And we're not going to do it on the 8th.
I can do it on the 25th.
Of April or March? March. So yeah, I'm looking back in March, and those are the two dates I've been told do not work, right? It doesn't work to go April 8th, and it doesn't work to go April 1st.
It was the 18th and 19th because it was before a work session. That was.
Oh, March.
Of March, 18 and 19.
Yeah, I guess, and Roy told me that didn't work for him.
Yeah.
Oh, that doesn't work for you, Roy?
No, not the 18th or 19th, no.
Oh, of March.
Can you say that louder?
Yeah, 18th and 19th does not work for me, or the week of the 9th. 8th.
Of April.
So you got the 25th and 26th of March?
25th is fine. That works for me.
Thumbs up.
Or 25 and 26.
That'll be a record.
That's helpful to walk away with the dates.
Why doesn't everybody just take we'll just delay very briefly, check your calendars for March 25th and 26th. Nobody's raising their hand with a great problem there, is that correct?
Just make sure you have a light.
I don't know when spring breaks are, if that impacts anybody, with kids or.
SD2 is March 8th.
Yeah, what's that?
SD2 is March 8th, the week of March 8th.
Okay. All right.
No,
You were going to be gone.
I'm in Kentucky that week, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, never mind.
Oh. So the other one was April 15th, was that correct?
That's
Easter weekend.
That's Easter, okay.
Well, Kendra, we might have to go on your
April
birthday.
22nd.
So do we have to have all 11 people there?
Yeah, we should.
Ideally, yes, but if it's absolutely possible, it's absolutely impossible. What are we down to for dates?
Nothing.
April 22nd.
Is March 11th too soon to be ready?
Sorry, Mayor, you said your event was in the evening on the 1st. Presumably, are you going to be doing planning throughout the afternoon, and so that would be, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty much all day. So what was it, April 22nd? Was that what somebody said?
I said that, or Jennifer said, is March 11th too early to be ready?
Okay, let's start with April 22nd, and then we'll go to March 11th, April 22nd. Any conflict?
I have a question about that. I don't have a conflict. I just wonder if that would be enough time that if there were sort of important priorities that should be reflected in the budget, could that get incorporated into the budget presentations, conversations soon enough? Or is that too late?
Good question.
I like the March 11th if it's feasible to pull it together by then.
Certainly, when we get into April, it's harder, although it depends on the size, right? If it's, scale would matter. The later we go and the bigger the scale of something you want to put into the budget. And yet, at the end of the day, when we present it to you guys in May, you absolutely have the authority to hold it. We're not approving those things. This needs to be.
Chris, can you pull it off by March 11th? That gives you about a month.
We can certainly target that.
Is everyone okay with March 11th?
Yeah.
March 11 and 12.
You want to check your calendar first?
Thank you. I'm looking at it right now. Thank you, Kevin. Saved me.
There's some event at the Hilton Garden Inn at 4:00, but I don't know what it is. It's not quite.
You want us to, for those of you who are in orientation, do you want us to, I would imagine, stay away from orientation that day?
I thought we were done.
I'm showing Belknap. Debbie's gonna love me. I'm looking at my calendar, says we're gonna be at Belknap for Public Works orientation on the 11th, but I would assume we would move that to another day because we're gonna be tied up all afternoon and the next day on this. and she'll be okay. Public Works gets plenty of attention.
But that's at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we're talking
But for
Friday
those-
afternoon.
For 4 of them, they would be tied up from 9 to 11 or 9 to noon, and I mean, essentially their whole day shot. In fact, I would say if that were the case, we should be trying to do the retreat for the whole day, and not try to do orientation and the retreat. But does March 11, the afternoon, it does work on, I believe we can make it work. If I can get a facilitator, a location, which I'm commonly a location, that's the preference day, March 11 and 12.
Okay, March 11th it is, if only from lack of other good alternatives. So sometimes it's works well that way.
So you're looking March 11th in the afternoon and all day Saturday?
Yes, and can you give me a time on what can we, how late do we want to go on Friday? So should I be having dinner?
Yes.
And us meeting after dinner, so we're 1 until 8 o'clock-ish, kind of thing.
Right. And then just Saturday morning.
And then Saturday.
But all day Saturday?
I don't know. I mean,
We're talking about sort of a day and a half.
yeah, I don't think we will need 2 full days, so however much time we do Friday will impact how long Saturday is. I just want to know, if we're going to bring in dinner, which we'll do dinner Friday, so then if we're doing dinner, we might as well do a few hours after that, I would imagine.
What time do you have dinner at?
What's that?
What time do you eat dinner at?
Not
4 o'clock in the
that would be
afternoon.
Like 7 is dinner, Chris.
Okay, so go like 1 to 7?
No. You gotta eat in there somewhere.
Yeah, the idea of like having dinner and then going till 10 or 11 at night,
Yeah,
I think
too
makes
late.
Saturday ineffective.
Yes. Yeah, we don't want to be exhausted.
So I might end with dinner.
And, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll
That'd
work
be-
with
This is just a nice conclusion, right?
Okay.
So, 1 till, you want to actually have a working dinner and continue?
Working dinner at 6?
Or just a
Yeah,
social
Yeah, it gives us
dinner.
a chance to
Just-
informally just
just social
socialize.
Okay.
At 6?
So
Am
just,
I allowed to bring wine?
Yes,
Lots
please.
of cases.
Depends on the location.
so 1 to 8 on Friday, dinner around 6.
6:30 to 8.
Jennifer can eat hers at 7.
I was just concerned it was gonna be at like 4 and then we'd go all night long.
Okay, roughly
Saturday?
1 to 8 with dinner starting at a traditional 6:30-ish time.
Normal hour.
Okay.
And then what, 8 or 9 o'clock on Saturday?
And then call it 8 to noon
Oh.
or 8 till 1?
Oh, can we do 9 to 4 or
Yeah.
9 to 5?
9.
9 to 2.
9 to 4.
So we got to start.
Full day.
1 o'clock on Friday and 9 o'clock on Saturday, and we'll put a good schedule together there those 2 days.
Okay.
Okay, how long are we going on Saturday?
Maybe 4. On the outside.
For this sake, without the facilitator locked in yet, I would tell you scratch your calendar out for a full day.
Yeah.
But we'll take it to what the right amount is to get the job done. If that done at 1 or 2,
Okay.
right? We would be
Breakfast to
done.
dinner.
Just put it that way.
Okay, are we done on that one? All right, is there any public comment on item number 5? No. I'm assuming there's nobody on Zoom, Kevin, right? Okay. So that concludes that. Item number 6 is a new item. If everybody remembers, the goal here was to have some sort of advance warning of what's coming up on our future business meetings. So, Chris, item number 6.
Yeah, so a couple things I was just going to highlight. So next week on consent, you've got board and commission appointments. My understanding is all of the appointees who are being recommended, they're in the packet.
Their names are, and I've sent an email to Wynette asking her to distribute out all the applications. You've already seen the ones for the Police Advisory Board, but we'll send out all applications, successful and unsuccessful, for everybody.
Okay, she said she could do that for me tomorrow. So
It's done. We got
it's
it.
already done. Okay, so you've got everybody who applied to be on a board. So I wanted to just flag that's on consent. That's 14. And then also that night, there's, just because there's one agenda item on action, please don't have that mean that of the 21 consents, we can take 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 off. But you can, you're in total control. The Griffin Tax Increment Finance Assistant application is a critical one. And so I would advise that you've got your packet, it's already out there to the public. I would look at that sooner rather than later, that application. And staff, I think, did a good job of attaching the other critical documents like their application and the urban renewal plan for the downtown, your policy on tax increment finance use. So I would not wait until the weekend before the 14th or Valentine's Day to look at that. I would look at that one sooner.
Question from Councilmember Boyette. Chris?
Well, I mean, Chris, we see there's no applicants for Animal Control Board, no applicants for adjustments, no applicants for Parking Board. So, I mean, do we really need these boards then if no one applies for them? Or are they critical that we have to go out and find somebody? I mean, just what do you think?
So one of those is absolutely critical, right? Board of Adjustments, that's statutorily mandated, that kind of thing. The other ones are all, I suspect, locally generated, and the key is how, and it is a common question and a good one. How in 2022 do you engage the public in a way that they want to be engaged? And the old school boards thing, in many respects, is becoming less and less in some areas. While the same thing, Citizen Police Advisory Board is a new board. So it is always an evolving discussion. But it's very hard for elected bodies to get rid of boards.
I'll comment on one of those. I've had discussions with Debbie about combining the Public Works Board with the parking board or the traffic control board.
Yeah.
And she's very interested in doing that. And then we'd have an issue about, you've got maybe too many members, who gets to serve, who doesn't, who has to serve. But those are issues presumably we could work through. So expect some further input on that from Debbie.
Back to Mike's point, can't we eliminate some of these boards? So you got the parking board, no applicants. You got the traffic control board, no applicants. And so, I mean, if there's not enough interest in those, and if you combine them, do we have to have two boards combined with, instead of 4, you have 8 members? Can't we just eliminate some of them and say, traffic control, if there's enough, say traffic control board, you're going to take over parking or something like that, and rewrite their, which ones of these boards are statutory requirement and others that it was an initiative 25 years ago that now we have lived with it and we can actually say, let's do away with it.
And most of these are up to the city and are always potentially subject to being axed, but some are statutory. We could kind of go through that analysis. There are some that definitely need to be revised, like the appeals board, which it's sometimes a little deceptive because it's virtually impossible to get people because of the way our resolution is written for that one, for example. That is the board that is, in theory, responsible for determining conflicts in interpretation of our building codes. So that if a contractor doesn't like the way that the building division is interpreting code provision XYZ, there's a place to go. And I think that's statutorily required.
But if you can't get an architect and electrician to apply.
And that is where we have screwed up by creating a resolution that says on that statutorily required board, which does not have those requirements, thou shalt have an architect, blah, and a contractor, blah, blah, blah. We need to go back and change that to make it much easier to serve on those. But I don't think they have met in at least 2 years. So in a perfect world, we would eliminate them. But again, I don't know we have that choice. But we should go back and review that whole structure. That was a topic conversation I was having with Brent Brooks a year ago. We can dig out those emails and look for some, doing some cleaning on that.
So because it's statutory board and we don't have anyone on it, does this mean we're in violation of state statute of not having this or functioning board?
I don't think so, because we technically do have the board, and there's no real need for it. So
there are other people who are serving on it, just not all the slots are filled.
yeah. Just because we have vacancies on the board doesn't mean the board isn't meeting. It does not a functioning board. Don't assume you just eliminate it because there's vacancies. That's fairly common. Councilmember Purington.
Well, that was my point too, was which of these boards have a quorum? If they don't have a quorum, then they can't really make recommendations, or, it's not a functioning board.
Right.
So
It's
I
pretty
don't know
rare,
that.
and I'm no expert, I haven't gone through, but I don't hear about board XYZ is non-functional because it can never get a quorum.
Right.
But
And there's a new.
Staff too, in our tactical tomorrow, we, I think, generally speaking, would love to consolidate some. And yet, they're
open to that.
Parking would be one that I would be concerned about eliminating, and not wanting parking issues to become, you guys are the ones who have to deal with all issues relative to parking. Some of them, it is really important to have a group of interested constituents, business owners, who are making those recommendations. But there is a willingness to consolidate and make recommendations to you, but there's not a statutory mandate, and we're not seeing, they're not meeting, and we don't see to have a strong purpose for them.
And I guess I would recommend that we ask staff, not that staff doesn't have enough to do, but to give us their recommendations about what we could get rid of, if anything, or in the case of the appeals board, for example, what changes could be made, because there's 25, 26 of them. We're not going to go through them all one by one, but our ordinances do require, in the case of a city board, that there be a city staff liaison. And so that's the logical person to make recommendations to us about these sorts of issues.
Agreed.
And don't you have those reposted, those vacancies?
Yes, those have already been re-advertised, and that closes here in February. So if you know of anybody, in fact, I had somebody call me today who wants to be on the traffic. He really wanted to be on the Public Works Board. There wasn't space, so we'll put him. He's an engineer, wants to be on the public, or not Public Works, but Traffic Control Board. So. Okay, any other, were you done on your highlights, Chris?
When we get to the 28th, we are anticipating some land use issues, public hearings coming, that there's going to be there have been interested neighbors in those zone changes, those conversations. So those packets aren't out yet, but we'll flag those again for you, but that's coming up at the end of the month. And we'll learn how tonight went. What I've heard preliminary is sound is working really well, but I think we witnessed, some technology issues relative to presentations.
And Chris, Councilmember Boyette asked whether there's any way, if the problem with the broken Zoom connections is there, where's the problem there, and is there any way to make sure?
Can they come to the city hall and use a dedicated service?
So that's what I have flagged, where we have an important subject like some of these land use issues. I'm either going to want them in this room or at the Miller Building, because we are very high comfortable that we've got city to city, and if something happens, they can walk over here and we don't end up in a jam.
Yeah, Chris, I think when you have the actual agenda items like that, they should be in the room. The consent agendas, if they're on Zoom, most of those are going to be pretty simple and short. But I would like to see the presenters in the room during those presentations. So we're not having that interruption, because it is interruption for not just us, but also the public.
Another issue is if we are here and we have a large number of members of the public here with this configuration, which is great for the sound, it eats up a lot of room space. And so we put people down here, we put people down there, and we can put people out in the lobby with a television connection, right? So we do have room to expand public participation in here, but it's not the Metro. So we'll have to get some sense if there's something that's controversial, how many members of the public we can accommodate.
And when we were at the park, we had a portable mic that a person talked on and you could hear a little speaker. Could they not put that up here so we can at least hear the person talking better than what we've done?
I could hear him out of this.
I could hear the mic. That mic wasn't turned on for me, but it was turned on for the accountant when we started. That was amplified sound coming from that.
Was it? I said it wasn't, which might have been my mistake. Okay. And that was not creating any.
That wasn't turned on like that when he was talking.
It was.
It was.
Wasn't talking.
We just have to switch you and Pam.
Part of that challenge is it's not super directional, so you really have to talk into that one.
And they can pull this off the span also.
So go stand up in front and talk.
Councilmember Boyette, would like to.
Yeah, we were not
couldn't
getting
hear-
that kind of
That wasn't
quality.
hooked up for the.
Okay, well, thank you. I can encourage our speakers to
talk like that.
To talk like that.
Kevin can turn it up on the wall.
Talk like that.
Is that Barry White?
A voice made for radio.
Barry Manilow, Barry White, Barry Manilow, whichever.
Okay, if that concludes your item number 6, Chris, is there any public comment on item 6? Still no, there's nobody on Zoom, there's nobody present here. Council discussion before public comment on non-agenda items. Councilmember Neese.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that I was able to attend Zoom last meeting and participate. I think that was very important. One of the things I had difficulty as I was doing that, this is the first time I think I did it without everyone doing it, so I could always see everyone. I really couldn't see very well as far as the council people, so when we talk about we need to be observed by the public, it wasn't real observant for me to see everyone. The other thing that I really missed was looking out and seeing the public, seeing all the different people there, some of the expressions they would make during certain other public comments. So there was a lot that I missed, and I would almost, if we're going to do this, I'd like to see a camera towards the public so we could actually see the public as well in some way or another. So it was again, I appreciate the ability to do that. I think it's an exception basis is really something that's needed. But I did feel I missed some of that part of the meeting just because I didn't have that really full present interactions. Just a comment, a suggestion as we further expand this in this technology. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Puritan.
Well, that was one of the things that I mentioned to Chris and Denise was that we need to come up with a clear policy. I don't know that it needs to be a resolution or ordinance, because it may change, but some sort of a policy because it states on there that the council members may choose. And that was never the issue, that they could choose whether or not they want to be here. That it was in more extraordinary circumstances, such as being ill or something, kind of wavering on the vacation thing. But I think we need to have some sort of a clear policy. I don't think it's a pick and choose when you're going to be here. I think because we have the technology, if we can be there. And I also wanted to add the thing, because I know whenever I had my surgery, you did not want me making a decision on anything, because they say after surgery or when you're on drugs, don't make any major decisions.
Or operate large equipment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be something that we really can,
Just to clarify, my understanding is that's what staff is doing.
That's what they are doing.
Yeah, so.
We will need to have either ordinance or resolution. There'll need to be something you adopt that set the standard there.
So maybe a resolution, because it may change.
My preference is that it be a resolution, whether the
Okay.
ordinance has to refer to the resolution or what, but.
So Chris, that is in process?
That's one of our tasks of working.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, any other items of discussion? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I was reading Northwest Energy's nice little brochure that they gave each of us, and I read in there that the city of Missoula, the county of Missoula, and Helena, and I believe one more city, are working on projects with Northwest Energy for green electricity, green energy. And I was wondering if our Energy Commission is a part of what they've done, Or has any of that, is it something that the city of Billings, because I read that and I thought Billings needs to have its name here too. So does anyone know anything about that? Or could we participate in something like that if Northwest is partnering with Missoula and other counties or cities, if we can be a part of that too? Thank you.
And I'll just comment, Lisa Perry is part of our, with Northwest Energy as part of the Energy and Conservation Commission, I believe. So there's a line of communication there, but I don't know
Debbie
any of the
Debbie,
details.
not Lisa, Debbie.
Oh, Debbie is? Okay, so Debbie Singer
Yeah.
sits on that commission. But I don't know any more detail than that.
She's on that
Yeah, she's been.
Well, you're the expert.
No,
Fill us in.
no. What I do know is that the fantastic staff person who supports the commission, Louis Engels, was a part of the statewide group working on those green tariffs and green credits, did a lot of detailed examination. When I left the commission, his recommendation was that for a variety of reasons, it didn't make sense for Billings, but they continued the conversation. They continue to look for ways to make it work. I think the city, collectively, culturally, has done a tremendous amount of work to grab opportunities for on-site generation and energy efficiency credits and partner with Northwestern on clean energy. When I left, the decision was that it just didn't make sense for our city, but I know that Louis continues to work on it and is really, truly an expert. So I don't have any concerns that this is not being addressed to the benefit of the city.
Great. Any other, Councilmember Boyette?
The mayor and I came here last week and watched the zoning commission meeting, which was about land issues. I would encourage everyone to at least look at the ones that's going to be coming up for Lewis and for Zimmerman Trail, to at least look at the zoning meetings to get the flavor of what the people in the neighborhoods are talking about, so that when it comes before us on the 28th, it's not brand new to you that what's happening, to at least look at you can watch them online. It's interesting to see the comments from the citizens folks who are paying our salaries, what they thought of the changes. Just an observation to see the zoning commission meeting before we vote on it ourselves. It was very interesting. Didn't you think, Mayor?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Councilmember Purington?
I didn't look up the date, but in December, we passed an initiative to limit the number of DOC commitments to Billings, and it passed. And the question was presented to the Assistant District Attorney as well as Brian Gukin, who is the Director of DOC. And they both stated that they did not think that there were any state laws that did restrict us from doing that. So to me, that means that initiative needs to go through. I know Gina's probably sitting there going, but we do need to look at that. And, I don't know how many that we could limit because I don't know how many we get. I know it's decreased. I think it has decreased. But because it was an initiative that was passed by council, I think we need to look at more information and on where that's at in Billings. And to follow through on that initiative.
So we're happy to report an update back to you. It's been a topic of conversation, including with Mr. Bryant. Well, so with Scott Twido and with Brian Gutkin in their interpretation as to how they were answering the question. It was a conversation today with Barry Usher, Bill Mercer, and Tom McGilvery as we're working on specifically what legislative areas are we going to try to tackle this session. Bottom line is what was at least communicated today is everybody's understanding, consistent with the conversations with Scott and with Brian, the state, it's a political issue. And so it is one of which there's arguably no downside to the city taking as strong a position as you want to take on it, but it doesn't have the teeth of law. No one believes legally we can say, DOC, you will not allow people to come into our community anymore beyond this number. Doesn't mean it's not worth making the statement and making the point to the state, to the legislature, and to the governor's office. And we can report back more thoroughly than this conversation, but that's the conversations we've had. Trying to follow up on that is a fair amount of backpedaling that hold it. We misinterpreted the question. I was not saying in this room the city can pass that and prevent the Department of Corrections from remanding, I don't know what the right term is, individuals to Billings.
Chris, isn't there also just a fundamental uncertainty of the underlying facts? We've been told that by DOC that their analysis is that Billings is not getting a disproportionate number of releasees. And is that true or isn't?
So that was
can we do something to get to the bottom of that?
Sorry, yes, that was a topic of today's conversation. I think if I would say politely, there is a strong opinions about what the facts are and what should I say? There's strong opinions about and a very low level of confidence that that we have the data to really define that. And so that it was an area that I will say in the conversation, I said, now that's an area if we need to spend some money as a city advocating that the county can like step up and spend some money to better understand the data, I would advocate to you that we be a partner in that regard, because the baseline information, there's not a high level of confidence that baseline information is hurting all of us. It's hurting us at the local level and the state level make strong decisions relative to incarceration, relative to DOC, et cetera, et cetera.
So my understanding too is that the numbers that Gookin is presenting are regional numbers. And what more locally, what Billings numbers are. So there is that gap in there. And my other question is to put the pressure on the sheriff to do what Gookin said, is going, the state, you're not paying us what it takes to pay for these inmates, so we're not going to take them. I mean, that's what Gookin did, because everyone says, well, Bozeman didn't take any. Well, there was a reason they didn't take them. So I don't know if we can exert pressure on our sheriff to do the same thing. I don't know that we have that. I mean, I know he's an elected official. He can do what he wants to over there at the jail. But I think that's another issue with who we have here and who's out on the streets. We had 2 more dead this past week, and one of them was from Alternatives. So, and I don't know if he was a DOC commit. I don't know that. I don't know that was good.
Councilor Trickey?
And to follow up your question about comment about the data, the other thing that I think we need to understand really well if we're going to step into this is the decision-making process for who goes where. Because, there are aspects of this where, like, we don't want to get into the middle of. I mean, if somebody came from here and is coming back, then, that limits the number of people that we can actually talk about. So the question really is, are there really very many people who are coming here that have no reason to be coming to Billings?
I guess when it comes to data, I would suggest, we know this is going to be an octopus of issues, right? At least start by making sure that we're getting the data that is available. And then we can look at it and decide, is that adequate or maybe more likely inadequate? And right now, I don't think we're getting anything. At least the city council doesn't get anything. So what I've asked for in the past but haven't made a big deal of, I think every week there's a survey, or whatever the right terminology, a census of how many people are in the jail. So that we can sort of track that. It'll be something over 500. But how many of those are state? How many of those are city? Just get in the habit of sharing that information would be a good thing. Maybe there's a way then to get these the DOC commitments. How many people are actually in Billings or this region? Because absolutely that data gets meshed around. So can we maybe send a request to the state, to the county, asking them not to go out and do our work for us, create new data, but share with us what they already have. And then we can start getting educated a little bit better about it. Is that a reasonable first step in this process? And I don't know enough to even know what to ask for. But Councilmember Owen.
One of the things that I would specifically ask for is some sort of analysis, I guess, with proper privacy protections or whatever, of not just quantity, but quality. I think, if we're prosecuting a tremendous amount of felony possession or, similar things, but yet we're getting back a tremendous amount of felony PMFAs and felony strangulations. I mean, those are different in kind, and I think it makes for a very, I don't think it's fair to say that a felony is a felony is a felony. So I would be interested in some qualitative data to the extent that it's available.
How do we just magically pass or wave the wand and make that happen? I recommend that Kevin Iflin comment because he's the one who's the awfully quiet. Actually, used to live in this world, right? Is that okay, Chris? If we ask?
Absolutely. You'll let me know tomorrow if I later tonight if
He was still trying to get somebody to
I didn't
come up
do
on
my
the
job.
computer.
Councilmember Neese will buy you a little time, Kevin. Councilmember Neese.
So I want to get back to what Pam said about the initiative to limit the DOCs. And as I understand, the people who come here come through 3 different organizations. It's not always the Department of Corrections. And so, Chris, this is actually to you. You also said, we could limit the number, but we really can't do anything about it. And so what are we going to do if we limit and we say, hey, you only give 50 releases to us a month and they give us 150, what are we going to do? So if we have the data knowing that we're going to get 150, even though we said only 50, there's nothing we can do about it unless we're going to sue the state? Is that what we intend to do then, to try and rectify it? I don't think we are. And so it almost seems to me like it's better, we better time spent of maybe getting some of the data, but working with the state, working with the county, working with the different agencies to help find a different solution to resolve the issue instead of just saying enough's enough, we're just putting the foot down. I think the letter we wrote was well done, and I think it was maybe kind of sent a signal to them that we want to get something done, but I think saying we're going to force a number and then spend a lot of money collecting data to say, okay, we got all this data, but it's not, unless that data can be utilized in some other way, and maybe someone can speak to that.
That's why I say we have to understand what the process is, because we really just don't want a number of 150 whatever. Right. We want to understand how many people are coming here because they're coming to be paroled here. We need to know how many people are actually just being released because they're coming home. We need to know what all the programs are. We need to understand how those decisions are made and what that process is.
I agree. I think if we can get some more information, maybe it would help us so that we can address the issue better.
Yeah.
But I hate to see us spend a whole bunch of money and creating whole new data thing that we got all this new data, but then we don't do anything with it.
I would find out what the process is before I really dig deep for data, because chances are really good that there are only 2 or 3 processes that we even care about.
What I've asked for in the past, but there's nobody on our staff who we say, this is your job, go out and do it, is some sort of a written report. I mean, how does the process work? I mean, we're babes in the woods here, right? And so don't we need something in writing that we can stop just having all this anecdotal stuff that we actually can look back? But I don't know who to task for. Chris, you and I talked about hiring somebody, how to come up with the money to do that. We were hoping we'd snag Kurt Olme to do that. That would have been perfect, but that's not going to happen. So is there a way to understand this process in a permanent way?
So can I say first?
We're going to hire Tom.
Which I don't do enough of.
Chris first, and then Councilmember Rupsis.
2 of my staff work in this world, and I don't directly. I'm trying to understand both of them. Can you please share whatever you would like to in this regard, and then I'm happy to tell you what the latest is on now that Kurt has moved. What options do we have there?
I don't know if I can add anything, beyond the jail intake process. I mean, that I'm not familiar with, so I can't. If that's what we're looking for.
Well, and you're asking a really complicated question about what all the processes are, because there are a lot of different processes, because there are probationers who they don't necessarily have a plan that they're being released out. They're just already out on probation, so they're going to live wherever they're going to live. Then you have conditional release inmates. Those are Department of Corrections commitments, who are then conditionally released. That's like parole, but they're not being released from prison, so they're being released from a DOC program, like Passages or Connections Corrections, or a pre-release program, or some DOC program that's a placement, so they're being released, and that's going to have a whole different process of how they're being released and what their release plan is. And then you've got Board of Probation and Parole, Board of Pardons and Paroles. They have a completely different process for how they come up with their parole plans. I have no idea how they determine what those plans are. If it's caseworkers, I know they have caseworkers. I know they have reentry workers that help them. There's going to be a whole lot of different processes, and I'm not sure how to obtain that information, but.
And I'm sure, and.
Go ahead and comment, and then Councilor Repsis.
I totally get that, but I think the question really is just the process. The only process question we're really interested in here is how do they decide where do they go?
Well, and I don't think it's an easy answer, because it's a lot of, it's a lot of working with the inmate, like, where are you from? Where do you want to go? Where can you get a job? Where can you live? It's a lot of those things. So it's not really like, if you're going to go live here, it's a where can you live kind of thing. It's an interactive process usually.
Councilor Repsis, can you bring great light to this?
We just recently set up a complete advisory board having to do with this particular topic. And it might be one of the key areas of interest in that board was data analysis and reporting. And it might behoove us to give that board specific direction as they come about existing and find themselves in a conference room someday without really any kind of specific thing to tackle, that this might be a good first step for them to start looking into and provide us that information. And to
maybe, I guess what I'd say is that it's a little beyond the resolution though that we prepared, which is really
it's exactly as we were talking about the board, it was exactly this type of thing, is how are, what is the data? What are we looking at? And whether it's, specific to, the number of traffic stops or, the number of, offenders in our community. This is exactly the type of thing we were talking about. And I think it's up to us to provide direction to that board, because they're not going to really know out of the gate what they should be tackling. This might be a good first project for them. And it's deep, it's big, it's hairy, but it'll certainly get them initiated into the topic pretty quickly.
I guess I'm not sure I would agree that was the scope of that board, the police advisory board.
Do you have a question?
But
yeah, well, just a question. Do we have a definitive number of why they're here and who are here and why they're here, under what criteria?
Well, I think that we can get that data, but it was going to come from a variety of different sources. I know that Adult Probation and Parole, they obviously keep a list of all their offenders that are in all different places. I mean, we get a list from AP&P regularly, once a month, I think. So we do have that list, and that generally lists anybody who's on their supervision. So if you want to know probation or parole, conditional release inmates, they're going to be on there.
I guess I'd suggest that this go on that list for that prioritization process, and that we'd not expect it just to happen magically, that it's going to require a dedication of resources, which means probably money, unless we've got existing staff that are sitting and don't have anything to do. We'd have to work anyway, but I'm not quite sure.
They'll work in parks.
They'll work in parks? Yeah. So, anything further? It's after 9 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen. Is there any public comment on non-agenda items? Anything that wasn't on our agenda tonight? There's nobody available on Zoom. There's nobody in our room. So thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.